Good morning, everyone. We'll start the meeting right on time today. I'd like to call the Planning Committee meeting to order. Members of the public are advised that our meetings are webcast live by the City of Hamilton and temporarily archived on the city's website. Other individuals in the media may also be audibly and/or visually recording this meeting. As well, a reminder, please, that all electronic devices are to be switched to non-audible function during the committee meeting. Madam Clerk, are there any changes to the agenda?
Yes, Madam Chair, there are changes. Under delegation request 6.4, Gord McNulty has withdrawn his request. Added 6.5, Linda Lukasik, Environment Hamilton, respecting Bill 66 for today's meeting, item 10.2. Added 6.6, Lachlan Holmes, respecting 41 Stewart Street for today's meeting to be heard under item 10.1. Added discussion item 10.3 is report LS 18045/FCS 18072, which was tabled at the August 14, 2018 Planning Committee meeting and is coming back to the committee today as it relates to private and confidential item 14.1. This item will be considered in open session after the committee considers item 14.1. And under private and confidential, 14.2 report LS 19006 respecting local planning appeal tribunal appeals by the Green Organic Dutchman Holdings Limited settlement proposal is being deferred to the February 19th Planning Committee meeting.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. And Councillor Clark?
Just on the conflict side. Sorry, on the conflicts when you come to that?
Yes, sir. Okay, I didn't know whether you wanted to declare it now. That's fine. So may I have a motion to approve the agenda as amended? Moved by Councillor Whitehead, second by Councillor Partridge. All in favor? And that's an electronic vote. Correct, Madam Chair? Madam Clerk? Thank you. Councillor Whitehead, did you, oh, Councillor Johnson, sorry. Yes, you have to hold it for a few seconds. Okay, that passes, thank you. I'll move on now to declarations of interest. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item 14.1 on today's agenda is an in-camera session with regards to the Terrapure environmental assessment. I have sought the advice of the City's Integrity Commissioner with respect to my potential conflict of interest on items involving Terrapure Environmental. I have a pre-existing professional relationship with Terrapure Environmental, which includes it being a former client of my firm. Though Terrapure Environmental is no longer a client, I have no reason today to believe that it will ever become a client again. My constituents may conclude that any previous interest I had in matters concerning Terrapure Environmental could influence my decision as a member of this council. Accordingly, though the Integrity Commissioner has advised me that in the current circumstances, I do not have a pecuniary interest in the matter, by virtue of my previous role, there exists an apparent conflict of interest, which the Members' Code of Conduct and common law requires me to declare. In these circumstances, I have also been advised to refrain from participation in the matter, and so I will be removing myself from participation. Well, that's a separate item on the CLC, but I will not be attending the We Go In camera, so I'll absent myself, Madam Clerk, and if the record could show that, please, and then you can call me back in for the other item.
And Councillor Clark, you referred to item 14.1, the private and confidential. There's also the report 10.3 and the information received today that you may want to add to that.
10.3, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Madam Clerk has that. Okay, so now may I have a motion to approve the minutes of the previous meeting of January the 15th? Moved by Councillor Farr, second by Councillor Adenko. All in favor? And that's a recorded vote as well. Thank you for this walking notes, Madam Clerk.
I forgot to include Councillor Collins, so I'll restart that vote.
Okay, we'll have to do it again. So we have to do it again, right? Councillor Whitehead? Yeah, you have to hold it. Okay. Thank you. We're going to move on to communication items. 5.1 is the Beach Canal Lighthouse Group's letter of support. May I have a motion to receive the letter referred to item 11.1, which is before us today. Moved by Councillor Collins, second by Councillor Wilson. All in favor, and I need a recorded vote on that, Madam Clerk. Receive and direct. No? Okay, good. All in favor? Carried. Delegations requests. May I have a motion to approve delegation request 6.1 for the February 19th committee meeting? Moved by Councillor Whitehead, second by Councillor Partridge. All in favor? Do we need a vote on this, Madam Clerk? Yes. Okay. Then we have delegation request item 6.4. It was withdrawn under changes to the agenda. May I have a motion to approve the delegation requests 6.2, 6.3, 6.5, and 6.6 for today's meeting? Moved by Councillor Brenda Johnson, second by Councillor Brad Clark. All in favor? Electronic vote. Okay, thank you. And may I have a motion to approve moving item 6.2, which is a delegation request from Sergio Mancha, to be heard before items 7.2 and 7.3 as his delegation relates to these two items. Moved by Councillor Whitehead, seconded by Councillor Partridge. All in favor? Question? Sorry. Councillor Farr, my apologies.
Amber in place of Sergio for the record.
Thank you. Okay. All in favor? Madam Clerk. Now we're going on to consent items is 7.1. Sorry, just a second. Official plan amendment, zoning bylaw amendment, and plan of subdivision applications. May I have a motion to receive item 7.1? Are any questions or comments? Okay. Moved by Councillor Partridge, second by Councillor Whitehead. Electronic vote? No. Fine. That's done. Thank you. Okay. And 8.2 is... So we're at that now, Madam Clerk. What about, okay. Okay, got it. Okay, so we have Sergio Mancha. It's going to be, Amber Lindsay. I'm trying to find the name. Is Amber Lindsay in the audience? Come on down, Amber, on behalf of Sergio Mancha regarding demolition permit applications 255, 257 Wellington Street North and the reports 7.2 and 7.3.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of Planning Committee. My name is Amber Lindsay. I'm a planner with Urban Solutions. We are the authorized planning consultants acting on behalf of the owners of 255 and 257 Wellington Street North, which are the subject of items 7.2 and 7.3 on today's agenda. Our office submitted demolition applications for the two single detached dwellings on the subject lands on December 5th of 2018. Following this, we received notice from the building department that the permits could be issued, but would be subject to the standard rebuild conditions, meaning that concurrent submission and approval of building permits to replace the dwellings is required to facilitate the demolition. However, it is not feasible for the owner to submit building permits at this time as the subject lands are intended for future development. Therefore, my request today is that committee direct staff to waive the standard rebuild conditions and proceed with the issuance of the demolition permit applications. As I mentioned, the owner intends to consolidate 255 and 257 Wellington Street North with the abutting lands, which are shown in blue in the image above, to facilitate the proposed mixed-use development of a 7-story building with commercial and office space on the first 2 floors and 60 residential dwelling units above. This proposed development was reviewed by the city's development review team on August 22nd of 2018 via the formal consultation process. And through this process, it was determined that an official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment would be required to facilitate the proposal. In addition to these planning applications, a number of technical studies and reports are required, which are currently being completed by our project team. Among those includes a record of site condition. The demolition is required to allow for the study and the remediation of contaminated soils on site to take place as soon as possible. We expect the complete submission of these planning applications to be made by early spring of this year. The second reason for my request today is that these dwellings that are on site are uninhabitable and have been vacant and disconnected from any services since early 2017. They are consequently proliferating crime and delinquent activity, and the owner has seen evidence of vandalism, dumping, and drug use on site. The property owners have accumulated over $13,000 in costs associated with maintaining the property. And these are things like repairs, cleaning, maintenance, repairs following break-ins. And this is all in the last year and a half since these properties were acquired by the owners. So city staff have required the standard rebuild conditions because these properties are subject to the city's demolition control bylaw. The purpose of this bylaw, as shown in the original staff report that was presented with the bylaw, is to prevent a missing tooth effect in the streetscape, maintain the neighborhood character, and prevent the loss of residential dwelling units. I feel it's important to note that our request to waive the conditions maintains the intent of this bylaw, as the properties are already abutting vacant lands. Therefore, the demolition would not result in an inconsistency in the street wall and would maintain the character of the neighborhood as it stands. And as I mentioned, there are plans to rebuild and replace the dwelling units lost through the demolition. In conclusion, my request today is that committee direct staff to issue the demolition permit applications without imposing the standard rebuild conditions. To some, it is not feasible for the owner to fulfill the condition at this time, as the lands are to be consolidated with the abutting properties and redeveloped. This intent is demonstrated through the owner's participation in the formal consultation process and the future submission of the required planning applications. The demolition of the existing houses will help to avoid further issues with vandalism and delinquent activity, and will allow for the remediation of the contaminated soils on site to begin as soon as possible. Thank you, and I would be pleased to answer any questions of committee.
Thank you, Amber. Councillor Farr?
Thank you, Amber. Good job. Appreciate it, and appreciate that this has come to committee. Certainly, a lot of folks are looking forward to getting moving at the former Kineski site, and I know adjacent neighbors have anxiously awaited this development as well. I appreciate, through you, Chair, the time in the last few days that we've had to communicate, and I'm hopeful that given those conversations and the conversations and correspondence I've had with adjacent neighbors to this laneway, particularly the laneway, but also this property now, we can come to some mutual understanding here today. So I understand your request, and through you, Chair, rather than completely eliminate the conditions, is there an opportunity for us to keep the conditions in place, but just extend that period, given that you've made it very clear here today of plans to keep moving? You're already in the formal consult or past that stage. So what sort of compromise might we contemplate here today?
Through the chair, we are committed to the rebuild. It's a matter of the timing of the requirement for the submission of the building permit application. So we couldn't satisfy that condition at this time, but say if there was a time limit implemented as a condition for the submission of that building permit, we could come to an agreement on those.
What would you suggest there, through you?
In terms of the timing for the submission, given that we haven't initiated the official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment process yet, I would say at least 2 to 3 years for submission of building permits.
Okay, and then you had also noted there's some remediation efforts that will be needed to be done, and that's something you want to do sooner rather than later?
That's correct. We know that a record of site condition is required, given that we're going from a commercial land use for the abutting properties to a residential land use, and just given the area. We know that there's contaminated soils, and actually we have received a phase 1 environmental site assessment that requires further study, so we know that that's the case.
So a further study would take some time through you as well?
That's correct.
Okay, so I heard you said 3, so 4 years would be safe, even though we would
safe.
love to see and expect something sooner. I understand and appreciate the policy, and that the reason Amber is here is we need to adjust the policy case by case. And I'm willing to do that, and I'll ask staff for some assistance in just a moment on that. Finally, through you, another discussion we had in recent days is one that's really important to the adjacent landowners, and that is upon approval, Public Works, probably a year and a half ago on the original laneway closure, and now that will be extended southerly by a couple of properties that, since that approval, the proponent, Steve Joyce, has purchased, and these are the ones in your slideshow today. The Hammerhead compromise was reached in that approval. So while historically, for many decades, the neighbors got used to entering or exiting on Robert and being able to come out or in from Barton's, they now only can come in and out at Robert. And so your client agreed that at the north end, at the closure area, he would make for some space to store snow, to have maybe they're getting some home repairs done, have some trucks turn around and get out, and for themselves to turn around and get out from where they came. Can we include formally that Hammerhead will be maintained as part of that original Public Works approval through you, Chair?
Through the chair, yes, we're committed to maintaining the Hammerhead. I believe the appropriate way to secure that would be through the approval of the alleyway closure, which we've submitted the applications for.
So through you, Chair, I just need the peace of mind, so when this comes to Public Works, of which I'm now a proud standing committee member, we can include that Hammerhead, and I can take you at your word here today as part of that new approval for the closure then. Do you have any idea through you, Chair Amber, when that's coming?
I believe the external circulation period ends February 18th.
Okay, and the letters have recently, just Friday, I think, went out to the residents, so it's soon. Okay, at the appropriate time, I'd like to ask staff how I might word granting this compromise here today. I have no problem with it, and I might add and maybe reiterate that I have consulted with 5 or 6 of the adjacent residents as well. So they have 3 conditions. I have no problem with their 3 conditions. The 3rd condition, Madam Chair, I'll ask staff for some assistance as well, and that's on, it's not relevant to this particular project, but it is relevant to something they've long sought after, which is on-street parking. And so I might bring that up at the appropriate time. For now, I'll allow the questions. Thank you. Thanks, Amber.
We'll come back to you, Councillor. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you very much. As a newly elected councillor, I'd just like to understand this a little bit better. And I'm looking at it through the lens of my own ward that I represent, where there are properties that I think buildings were demolished, and they have been vacated and empty for a long, long time, and they have, as a consequence, become a concern of the adjacent neighbors because garbage collects and it just doesn't look very nice. So just so I understand this, the owner who is seeking to develop the property owns the 2 buildings?
Correct.
And they have been vacated since 2017?
Yes.
But they've also been the subject of vandalism and crime, or
Through the chair, yes. So the properties have been boarded up and vacant since June and July of 2017, the two different properties. They've also been disconnected from services since that time. We weren't representing the property owners at that time, so I'm not sure who facilitated that process. But it's been completed, so they're no longer connected to any services, rendering them uninhabitable. There's been the intent to redevelop since the time that these properties were acquired, and even before then, as the owner owns the abutting properties. It's taken some time to really consolidate our thoughts around how to plan the development, given the constraints of the site. But the intent has always been there. The intent was never to sit on the properties to allow them to deteriorate. And as I mentioned, there's significant costs that they've incurred to try to keep the properties up to standard. but they haven't been habitable since that time.
Were they habitable before?
Through the chair, my understanding is that they were occupied, but I have seen photos of the sites at in the months that they were acquired, and they were in very poor condition.
So you want to demolish the buildings, or the owner does, but you can't develop on it, you're saying maybe for about 4 years?
Correct, because we're consolidating them with the abutting properties and going through the official plan amendment and zoning process, which includes the properties that we're proposing to demolish today. So in order for us to go through that planning process, it's going to be at least a few years until we secure the approvals necessary to facilitate the redevelopment, which includes at least 60 residential dwelling units.
And explain to me, so what is the part of that you're opposing, the conditions?
So because these properties are subject to demolition control, the building department has required that we submit a building permit at this time, which we cannot do because we don't know what the plans are yet.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Partridge.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Amber, thank you for your presentation. So I guess my question is, you know, we're always a little worried about properties being demolished and the properties being left bare. Are there any plans to turn this into a parking area?
No.
Through the chair, not at this time. I'd have to see what the zoning permits in terms of interim parking. My understanding is that the abutting properties are not being utilized for parking at this time. There are concrete blocks preventing that from occurring. Because we need to remediate the site, I don't think it would be feasible to allow for parking in the interim.
Okay, and again, I just need some clarification. So the buildings, the services were cut off.
Correct.
In 2017?
Yes.
Okay, and the proposal or the application, is it in process? Has it been in process since 2017?
Through the chair, yes. So since the properties were acquired in 2017, we've had an architect do a feasibility study about what type of development could be accommodated on the site. That's been completed, and we've gone through the formal consultation process with that concept. Since then, we know there are a number of technical studies that are required to accommodate or to facilitate the planning applications. Those are all being completed right now.
And so 2 years, you're asking for a 3 to 4 year extension, is that correct?
Right. So through the chair, the current standard rebuild condition requires the concurrent submission of building permit. We're asking for a delay to that submission requirement.
And I just want to make sure I heard correctly, though. What delay are you asking for? How long?
3 to 4 years.
So 3 to 4 years. And I mean, is there a possibility, I guess, that you could be coming back in 3, 4 years and asking for another extension? I'm just concerned about the lot being left demolished and vacant.
Through the chair, no, I don't believe that's the case. The property owner has been motivated to redevelop since 2017. It's just that we have these constraints related to noise because of the nearby railway and the hospital, as well as some issues with traffic that have to be resolved. So the submission, I don't want to use the words imminent because that's maybe a bit false, misleading, but early spring is when we're intending to begin the formal process of the planning applications.
So early spring 2019?
Correct.
Okay. It does give me some comfort to hear from the ward councillor who does, you know, his due diligence always on all the files and you know, has obviously been working very, very hard on this. So I appreciate the answer to your questions. I may come back on for a question with staff, though. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Whitehead.
Yeah, I'm just a bit confused on the official plan amendment. So currently, we have the old official plan. The new official plan, we've, in a number of areas, have already implemented bylaws in place. So are you suggesting then that this particular project would need to amend even the new official plan?
Through the chair, no. There has been no zoning change as a result of the comprehensive zoning review. So we're still under the old City of Hamilton 6593 bylaw. The amendment to the official plan is to facilitate an increase in density, but there's no, that's for the 2013 policies. There's been no newly implemented. The secondary plan for the setting sail would have to be required, but that's not yet in force and effect, to my understanding.
Yeah, I'll have to ask the question of staff. I just find it surprising you would have to go through that rigmarole when I believe the whole official plan purpose, the new one, was to encourage intensification and opportunities, and staff have indicated that it creates more flexibility for development as opposed to the old official plan, yet you're telling me that you still have to apply for amendments to the official plan, so it's just not jiving with what I understand what we accomplished. So I'll take that out with the staff. The other question, I'll ask the staff the same question, but what is your understanding if you don't meet the timeline requirement? What happens?
Through the chair, I'd ask staff to speak to this matter, but there are a number of conditions that would be associated with that if we were not under the current framework of the demolition control bylaw, if we were not to fulfill those conditions within the time frame agreed to, that there would be a tax levy attached to that. But I'll ask staff to confirm.
Yeah, I'll be asking that question as staff. I just, again, need to understand, I have no, and I'll have to ask staff questions on the disconnect too, because I'm a little concerned about, what's it called, demolition through neglect? If you cut off services, you're basically saying that building's coming down and we haven't even authorized it yet. So I'm concerned about that approach, but it's got nothing to do with your organization. So official plan amendment you need. We're not clear if you get the 4 or 3, was it a 3-year extension or is it a 2-year extension you're asking for on the current plan?
I think to be safe, at least a 3-year extension.
3-year extension?
It could be met through the chair in advance of that timeline, but just to allow for the entire planning process to be flushed out.
And if you don't meet that 3-year timeline, we're not absolutely clear what, so I'll ask the staff that question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Councillor Farr. Thank you, Councillor Farr.
Amber, I'm just dealing with our representative from the building department here. We may have an issue where this might have to go to council and then work with all parties on the wording. I'll have staff explain for the record in just a moment rather than me trying to do it. But on the alternatives for consideration, it basically is telling us that should the committee wish to approve the demolition without imposing any conditions, the following recommendation is appropriate, and it basically says again that the director be authorized and directed to issue a demo permit, full send. So bartering and coming up with compromises here today might be a challenge, and I'll have staff explain in just a moment. But trying to do a compromise on the fly at this time probably wouldn't be a benefit to anybody here, including my colleagues. So I'll ask that of staff, exactly what the issue may be. And I actually was wondering about that when I saw the alternatives for consideration on this brief report and the next one, which is similar. It's just a different address. So through you to the chair, just so we're absolutely clear, your client would agree to an extension. You're saying 3, instead of, it says right now, yeah, you can have the demo permit, but you have to pay $20,000 and you have to have in the ground, you have to have your building permit within 2 years. For the record, through you, Chair, how would you suggest, what is your client willing to compromise on with respect to the wording? How might that wording change in your view?
Through the chair, so the wording as it stands requires the concurrent submission of the building permit. Okay. So my request would be that the submission and approval be delayed for 3 years.
Okay. And the demolition still occurs?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you, and then I'll have a couple of questions for staff. Thank you, Amber.
Thank you. Then can we, no further questions of the delegate, motion to receive. Moved by Councillor Whitehead, second by Councillor Partridge. All in favor? Thank you, everyone. Now I'm going to go back into Councillors' questions to staff. Councillor Farr?
Thank you, Madam Chair. George, thank you for coming today. So, What's the deal? Can we not compromise and modify the language here today, or do you need some time between now and council to firm up whether or not the Building Code Act would allow us to do that? Through you, Chair.
Through the chair, it's actually under the Planning Act. It's not a Building Code Act issue. But the concern here is that in the past, we've been advised that we can't, the conditions, either we impose them or we don't. We can't modify them. I spoke with legal, and I think they're saying we have to take this back to legal to analyze or to go over it, to see if we can modify the length of time or any of the conditions. Because right now, the way it appears is that we'd have to impose all the conditions or none of them. I don't think that's the way committee wants to go at this point. But I've spoken to legal, and they're willing to sit down with me or from our division to discuss this further to see what we can do.
Okay, so I have no trouble deferring to council. I do have a little bit of trouble just going with the alternative option, which is carte blanche, go ahead and demo without any conditions, especially when you're dealing with some of the residents and you have an agreement from the proponent on a compromise. So I appreciate that. Sorry for the last minute. I probably called everybody except you, George, yesterday. So thank you, and I'll listen with interest to other questions to staff.
Thank you. Councillor Whitehead.
I guess my first question is, our whole policy is about ensuring that we, not only the streetscape, but we don't lose viable residential housing in our community. That's the principle. So I'm trying to understand how it is that's the protection we're putting in that was supported by this council, and that is our policy. How do we allow disconnection of services in advance of any demolition permit? Because to me, it's demolition by neglect, because if you don't have services, that building, of course, won't be functional or rentable. So help me understand that process in which we all but say, yeah, you're going to demolish this building well in advance of any demolition permit coming forward.
Through the chair, the disconnection of services is a requirement under the building bylaw to ensure that the services are disconnected prior to them demolishing the building. I can see the council is concerned because sometimes they do have to cut off water, sewers, but it's just to ensure that there's no services to the building before they start demolition, because that could create a hazard to the building if they have cut off electricity or gas. But that's basically just something that was written in the building bylaw to ensure that that's done prior to them starting demolition.
Okay, well, two things. One is they don't have a demolition permit, so it's a bit premature to be suggesting that we're going to cut it off and then apply for the demolition permit. So, help me understand. And my understanding is that this cutoff wasn't under this operator. It's been cut off for a while, and long before a demolition or even the property was transferred to a new ownership. So, help me understand. Was it cut off under this current ownership, or was it cut off under the former ownership?
Through the chair, I don't have that information. They normally, if they cut off the services, they don't have to tell us. They just have to inform us prior to issuance of the demolition permit. A lot of times they'll give us the form saying it's been disconnected right before we issue it. So they don't usually give us that form when they apply. They wait until the permit is ready to be issued before they give us the form. Whether the previous owner has disconnected the services, that's up to them. They're the owner of the property. We wouldn't have that information if they did it prior to application.
Okay, so I'm glad we clarified a loophole within our system that could be exploited by anyone that wants to get their house in such ill repair that it's not rentable, and therefore a demolition permit is the only course of action. It's not something that the council ever wants to be boxed into. So if, in fact, we're not policing viable housing where services are being completely cut off, then what's the point of even having all our other policies and ensuring that we don't lose housing stock? I'm just trying to understand that. But that's a conversation we need to have going forward. Official plans, so help me understand, it seems an awful long time, 3 years, 4 years, and I'll support it, but I need to understand from the staffing point of view, what are the requirements that they would have to meet that would require that length of time?
Through the chair to the councillor, they went through a formal consultation process. So at that time, it was indicated that they needed an official plan amendment and a rezoning. The reason why they need the official plan amendment is these lands are located within the setting sale secondary plan. The setting sale secondary plan has not been incorporated into the Urban Hamilton official plan because at the time that the ministry was reviewing the official plan, those lands were under appeal. So they're still separate. So based on the proposal would then be required to be reviewed under those policies, and I can see that they're designated local commercial low density. So based on the proposal, they would need an official plan amendment. So that would then account for the time frame that would be required to go through that process, plus the site plan process on top of that.
So that certainly makes sense now. I mean, I just couldn't understand that piece, but that's an anomaly with the setting sail. So I appreciate that. Again, though, we just did an open for business in regards to rezoning applications. Is it a 3-year time frame or 4-year time frame that we identified?
So through the chair, not only for the rezoning, where we're averaging for a rezoning and official plan and OPA is about a year. We certainly have some that we do quicker, but it's about a year for the rezoning and official plan amendment is our average. But then there are subsequent approvals as well. So then we have the site plan process, most likely a design review process, and then the building permit application process. So if you tack all of those on, I would say 3 years is generous. But is probably a good conservative estimate if you want to make sure that you're capturing the overall timeline. I would hope we could do it quicker than that, but I don't want to predict whether or not there may be some back and forth. If there's some additional consultation, neighborhood meetings, those sorts of things required, it does extend the timeline. So 3 years from basically formal consultation, the very beginning stages, through to actual building permit issuance for an application that requires an OPA and rezoning is, as I said, it's probably a good conservative estimate.
Perfect. And I guess my last question to flush out this bit of anomaly, trying to help and assist the ward councillor. If our principle again is demolition permits is not about removing housing stock, and we want it replaced as soon as practical. We understand some of the limitations, so that's a given. But the principle in the context of the bylaw remains. You're saying that we can't even adhere in a modification of permit to meet those principles? Is that what I'm hearing through the building department?
Through the chair, I'm trying to figure out what the question is. Regarding the issuance of the building permit or the conditions? Oh,
no, the conditions. So right now, they're asking for the current conditions that were obviously passed through policy, and I don't know if that was an actual bylaw, but certainly passed by this council. But the premise, the spirit of that is to protect housing, and obviously character, but housing stock. So adhering to that principle, if there was a compromise saying, look, we're prepared to do this, but we still want to sort of keep a little healthy tension on your application when you're requesting a 3 or 4 year window, it would only make sense that the actual principle of keeping that pressure on so we can bring residential units back in as soon as practical makes a lot of sense.
Through the chair, that's correct. Under Section 33 of the Planning Act, the intent of the demolition control bylaw is to maintain the housing stock in the city. And that's why council passed this bylaw. And the idea there is once we issue a demolition permit, there's an intent to rebuild if it's a house or a residential units in that building. So that's why they have, and under the Planning Act, it tells you you can impose these conditions. You have to build within 2 years, so much $20,000 lien on each property. There are concerns, there's conditions we can impose on it. And I think that was the intent, is to maintain that housing stock within the city of Hamilton.
Yeah, so we agree on principle, but you're now telling us that going beyond that in regards to sticking to the principle but providing more flexibility under unique circumstances, the legislation doesn't contemplate that?
Through the chair, it's just the advice we've been given in the past may contradict a little bit, but I have a feeling that once I speak with legal, I think there is some flexibility, but that's my own personal opinion. I think you should be able to impose like a 4-year term, and I think you should be imposing some conditions in terms of securities to ensure that they do it, because if you issue a demolition permit without some financial restrictions on it, they may not get a building permit, right?
And
I think there is some flexibility. It's just a matter of us, it's the language in the Planning Act. If I had seen this maybe a day earlier, I might have talked to legal before coming here, before the committee. I apologize, but I don't want to give a legal opinion on something that may come back. But I have a feeling from what I've read that there is some flexibility. It's just a matter of how much flexibility.
And I appreciate it, Madam Chair, if I could, a brief comment. I certainly support the ask. I think that is something to flush out. I'll certainly depend on the ward councillor to make that determination. But based on what Jason had to say in regards to the OPA and the timeframes, the timeframe makes sense. In the context of the safety issues that were identified, to take those buildings down now makes sense. I do think we need to have a conversation in the spirit of what cutoffs and what controls we may or may not have, because I am concerned that that could be a tool to take housing stock out by allowing it neglected. Once you take the services out, then heating and water and sewer, then it's not rentable, and it's not rentable. The house continues to deteriorate, and then by neglect, the house becomes non-livable. So that's another side issue, but I support all those other things. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just to clarify, this is a bylaw that we have passed as a council, that if there's a demolition, there has to be a building permit within a period of time.
Through the chair, that's correct. This is a bylaw. The demolition control bylaw was passed by council in 2009 under the Section 33 of the Planning Act.
And it provides for 24 months, 2 years?
Through the chair, the Section 33 gives you they could impose conditions, and that's one of the conditions. I have the wording. I was looking at the wording myself just now. It says up to 2 years, but don't know how strict that's going to be.
So how many of these situations have we been in where we've changed the policy to 4 years on the onset?
Through the chair, I'm not aware of any where we changed the length. We have given ones where we haven't put the conditions at all on it. I haven't seen many where there's been modifications to it. There probably have been, but I haven't been involved in those.
What happens if 24 months from now, if we leave the policy as it is, and 24 months from now, the proponent has not been able to get approval? Do they have the latitude to come back to council and staff to request an extension at that time? Or what would be at that point probably a more accurate projection on?
Through the chair, I think the main concern here is that they don't wish to apply for the building permit to rebuild at the way the bylaw is written now. They have to apply for the demolition permit and the building permit at the same time and get both at the same time. And then construction has to be done within 2 years. I think the proponent doesn't want to apply for the building permit yet because they're not ready. They want to apply just for the demolition permit to demolish the buildings. I think that's where the concern from the owner of the property is.
Because they don't have any plans yet to build anything.
That's correct.
Councillor Farr, can I come back to you then for a motion or direction? Go ahead.
I would refer this to council to allow staff the opportunity to sit with the proponent and myself and devise wordage that would allow for the compromise as discussed.
Wordage, thank you.
Is that the first time wordage has ever been used in a motion?
First time I heard wordage. And it's been seconded by Councillor Partridge. Councillor Clark, to the direction?
So if I'm hearing correctly, the councillor is asking that it come to the next council meeting. So we're going to be doing committee work at the next council meeting. Why wouldn't it just come back to planning?
That's
we
fine.
could debate it and then deal with it accordingly.
That's fine. To the next planning meeting.
Okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Good point.
Madam Clerk, can we combine both reports with the same direction? So report 7.2 and 7.3 being the same? Two different properties. Is that okay, Councillor? Yeah. With the same direction? So it's, sorry, and it has been moved and seconded. Councillor Whitehead?
I understand, but we have done concurrent processes to council for one reason, that is safety, health, to timing issues. In light of the fact that we're looking for another 2 weeks in the current condition of those properties, is there any concern about the extended timing? I'm asking both the representative, if she can shake her head yes or no, they're concerned about timing, and our staff. No? We'll be delayed for...
Sorry, Councillor,
So I was just asking for a shake head. So I'll ask staff then, is there any concern about timing?
So through the chair, I think the buildings have been vacant for some time. Judging by the pictures, the applicant is making good efforts to try to secure them. We can certainly have property standards take a look as well and make sure the buildings are secure. I'm checking as well. I'm not entirely sure if the building is on the vacant building registry, but that's another step we could take. So I don't have a concern that if we're coming back to the next planning committee, that will be an issue. But we can have property standards take a look and make sure that the buildings are secure.
It's just a question that need to be asked. Thank you.
thank you. Councillor Farr?
Again, in engaging with some of the residents along this stretch, there was the 3 conditions. I had no problem with either. 2 of them we'd been talking about for some time, and one was the hammerhead, which is going to be dealt with at Public Works Committee, in which the proponent has already shared that they're still on for. It's just being moved to the 2 properties that are in question here today to the south. I did have a 3rd condition, which was the on-street parking. So should I wait until the end of today's meeting to bring that forward? Or is now an appropriate time, since it is somewhat related to these 2 items? So through you to the clerk, is that fine?
Is it related, though, to the building of these properties?
Oh, it related to the engagement that led to this item being before us, though. Or I could wait till the end of the meeting. Okay.
Maybe I'd suggest waiting to the end, because I'm wondering if it's a public works issue, with street parking.
Oh, well, Brian Hollingsworth is here, and he's the
Let's deal with it at the
director
end of the meeting.
parking.
Okay.
Parking falls under, through you, Chair, to, is it a public works matter for on-street or planning matter? I thought it was planning. To allow for permit parking on the west side of.
Through the chair, we look after the permitting of on-street parking as well as metered parking. We always consult with Public Works with respect to traffic impacts.
Thank you. How about we leave it at the end of the meeting, because it really isn't to do with these 2
That's fine.
applications?
Just wanted to get clarity. Thank you.
So we have the motion on the floor. Madam Clerk, you have that. It's moved by Councillor Farr, second by Councillor Partridge. It's a recorded vote. All in favor? Electronic, I should say, sorry. Councillor Partridge, please. Councillor Whitehead, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Okay, Madam Clerk. It's on vacation. Wow. Who's got to add the votes up? All righty. Okay. So we have now, thank you everyone, that carries 8-1. Public hearings and delegations, please note for public hearings that can be subject to LPAT appeals will require the applicant and or agent to come to the podium so that we have a record of their support or objection to the staff report on the video recording of the meeting, as the videos become evidence in any appeal process. So item 8-1. Councillor Brenda Johnson, yes?
Just out of process, please. We have a couple of delegates.
They're on my roadmap.
Okay, so we're not going to deal with them before the, okay.
Thank you. It's on the roadmap. 8.1 is an application for amendment to the City of Stoney Creek zoning bylaw number 369292 for lands located at 222 First Road West, Stoney Creek, PED 19026, Ward 9. Members of the public, in accordance with the provisions of the Planning Act, please be advised that if a person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions to the Council of the City of Hamilton before Council makes a decision regarding the zoning bylaw amendment, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision of the Council of the City of Hamilton to the Local Planning Appeal Tribunal, LPAT, and the person or public body may not be added as a party to the hearing of an appeal before the Local Planning Appeal Tribunal unless, in the opinion of the tribunal, there are reasonable grounds to do so. So I'm just going to go out to the public. Is there anyone here, if you could indicate with your hand up, anyone here wishing to speak to this item, which is 222 First Road West? Anyone here wishing to speak to this item or here of interest on this particular item? Going once, Going twice? Going 3 times? Thank you, everyone. Seeing that no one has come forward, may I have a motion to close to the public meeting? Moved by Councillor Danko, second by Councillor Wilson. All in favor? Okay, thank you. And now, did you wish to have the, John Arians is here from IBI Group. Did we wish to have the presentation or Councillor Clark? Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. I'd be happy to move that we don't need the staff report today. This application is really a holdout from about 5-6 years ago when Penny Lanes was originally approved as a development. This planning committee prudently offered 5 years for the residents along First Road to come into agreements if they wanted to purchase the property behind them. My understanding is the proponent reached out to them and there had been some offers, but they weren't at market value. It's simply filling in an empty spot, a house on the front and a house on the back in layman's terms, not a planning term. And I'm supportive of that, so.
Thank you, Councillor. So you're going to move to waive the staff presentation, moved by Councillor Clark, second by Councillor Johnson. All in favor? Thank you. And Mr. Arians, did you want to just come forward and state your position on the application going forward for the record?
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of committee. We agree with the wordage of the staff recommendation.
You created a new one, Councillor Farr. Wordage.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So may I have a motion then, well, to receive, I guess, Mr. Arians' comments, correct, Madam Clerk? I'm sorry?
Sorry, just, it's item 4. May I have a motion regarding staff
Right,
report?
but do I need to receive Mr. Arians? No, just for the record, I don't. Okay, so may I have a motion then regarding the staff report with the amendment, the submissions received did not affect the decision. Moved by Councillor Clark, second by Councillor Johnson. Sorry. Sorry. Is that correct, Madam Clerk?
Yeah. See, he has to come to the podium to indicate support, but
Did? And so it's, do we not receive that? So it's for the record?
I asked the question.
I'm asking again.
yeah, no, it just has to be on the record. It doesn't have to be formally received. If he had actually done a presentation PowerPoint, we would have received that.
Thank you.
So Councillor Clark, you're moving the direction, the recommendation of staff, and with the added that submissions received did not affect the decision, correct? Councillor Clark, second by Councillor Johnson, all in favor? And it's electronic vote. Thank you. Sorry, Michael. Madam Clerk, just finding my way on here. Is it item 8.3 next? Sorry.
Number 5, just mover and seconder on the main motion as amended.
Okay, sorry, a moved by Councillor on the main motion for, sorry.
So it's on page 5 of your procedures.
So I move a mover and a seconder to the main motion as amended, moved by Councillor Clark, second by Councillor Partridge, all in favor? Okay, and do we have to do that electronic? Thank you. No problem. I don't know why we had to do it twice, but we'll figure that one out later. Okay. Okay, on to page 6 is done. Page 7 is item 8.3, correct, Madam Clerk?
Yes, Madam Chair, you're correct.
Correct. Okay, so we have Garth Brown respecting changes to dwelling unit sizes. And Mr. Brown, this was delegation request approved. Mr. Brown, you wish to come down. Thank you, sir. And everyone before you has a printout, and it's a 5-minute rule, correct? Good morning,
Chair,
sir.
members of council, staff, and guests. My name is Garth Brown, and for the past several years, I've been focused on finding affordable housing solutions throughout Ontario. Most recently, we've been building legal secondary dwelling units that would be legal basement apartments in detached homes in Halton, Guelph, Oakville, and elsewhere. And the reason I'm here today is that my travels have taken me in touch with many faith groups, agencies, homeless, and others who here in Hamilton have a bit of a barrier in creating exactly what we're doing in other municipalities. As I've outlined in my presentation, the barrier is around Section 19 and the bylaw that requires a square footage of at least 65 meters to build a secondary unit within a detached home. That equates to a size that most single detached homes in Hamilton do not have on the main floor, let alone in a basement or another area. And that barrier may have been in line when these bylaws were first introduced, and certainly in our view of what affordable or housing life was in suburbias of decades past. But today, with 6,000 on the wait list here in Hamilton for housing, that affects over 10,000 individuals, children, adults, seniors, and of course homeless. We need to look at ways to make a change and to make a change that can take effect immediately. The beauty and the best part of my journey over the last few years is the day that these families move into their apartment. They've come from situations that I won't bother to get into, but what they've moved into provides them with dignified, affordable, secure housing. And it provides them the opportunity to move forward with their lives. We bring children into schools, we bring people into transit, we bring people into stores, and we make more vibrant communities. And what's been I'll say a surprise, because you never know how the neighbors will react, but across the board, the neighbors have been very supportive of what we've done. One neighbor in the first home that we created in 2012 came across and said, "Would you mind if I put some plants and gardens in?" And she has helped to make those flourish and grow them accordingly. I won't go through all of the details, but I have explored not just the municipalities that are listed on my handout, but many others as well. And as you can see, the norm now is to provide bylaws that allow for space up to 40 or even up to 50% of the existing dwelling. And that allowance puts no minimum threshold. So I've built a unit up in Guelph, for instance, can be as small, and I think the same applies in Kitchener. If you look on the back of the handout, you'll see that a bachelor space can be 145 square feet and goes up from there. We want to build them respectfully. We want to build them to ensure that they serve everyone. And we want to build them based on the needs of our tenants today. Many of these tenants don't even dream of owning a vehicle. So when we get into parking restrictions around secondary suites, it becomes a barrier for a homeowner to say, yeah, let's create this, but oh, I've got to put cars in the backyard, or I've got to do something else. And I welcome the opportunity to speak with planning and others who are as equally excited and devoted to creating immediate housing solutions. Not ones that can happen 5, 6, 10 years from now, but ones that we can take charge of and make happen within a 2-month window. And certainly going through the permit process, doing everything legal is key, but we can do it together. I welcome your questions, and I thank you so much for this opportunity to share the future.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brown. I have Councillor Farr.
Yeah, I think we're on this through you, Terry. You're aware of our work with the so to date tiny homes, laneway housing,
yes,
units, sizes, and so forth.
Mm-hmm. I'm familiar with it. I've done some exploration looking at some properties in Hamilton to see if laneway would be allowed. Because of access for fire trucks and so forth. They weren't in the properties that I've found so far, but I'll keep looking. My focus is more so on the detached homes that are out there right now, and the multitude that are underhoused, you know, many seniors or sometimes empty nesters or sometimes widows, widowers who have space in their homes, and they could welcome the support of someone to help with the shoveling, someone to help with the lawn cutting, and more. And just the companionship too.
So I understand, and I very much appreciate that. Very much. I'm not just talking. And I'll ask staff for clarity on how they may respond to your delegation and how we may already in various ways be responding to your delegation in just a moment when it's appropriate. Through you, how do you ensure, though, affordability? It's how you open. It's and I'm glad you. Anytime we can call attention to the fact that we're closing in on 7,000 actually on the waiting list. Affordability is a massive issue. It's getting worse. It's not exclusive to Hamilton, but it's a crisis. So how do you ensure that if it's 400 square feet or 350 square feet, it's going to be affordable with what you've got here through you?
Through you, Madam Chair, I thank you for asking that question because I forgot totally to mention it. As we've moved forward in the Burlington environment, we've worked with Halton Region, who is the housing provider there. So in Halton Region, there's 3,500 applicants for affordable housing on the wait list. And so we work with Halton Region and create a passage, if you will, so that as these units are built legally and properly, and we get the occupancy certificate, we then turn to the region to bring a family who's on the wait list in. And the rent has to be, I own one of the properties. I started this in 2012, and the other property is owned by others. But I have an agreement with the region that my rent will be below the average market rent. Perfect. And they, we check in, I'll say annually, just to make sure that we're in line with that AMR, and I'm not allowed to raise the rents above and so forth. Okay. And because there's 2 units in the one home, it's financially sustainable. Now, I'm owning that property as an investor. For homeowners, the positive cash flow is very, very positive, and it's a great one that way.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor.
Thank you. So through the chair, a note in your report here that you've done some comparators to different municipalities in terms of the square footage that's required. I believe planning staff is working towards that. You mentioned in your presentation about parking requirements. Yes. Do you have a sense of how other municipalities handle the parking requirements?
Yes, I do. The tradition that exists currently in Hamilton does exist in other municipalities, but there is a very clear understanding that those perceptions are not today's reality and that we need to look at a change. Last evening, I spoke with the planning department in Welland, and Welland has a unique situation with Brock, some unemployment, and one of the largest densities of housing situations in Ontario. The planning department there has shared that they are now allowing a detached home to be duplexed and then a legal apartment to be created as well. So there can be 3 units in one detached home. And to your point, Councilor Danko, the allowance for parking is now 3, so 1 vehicle per apartment, and it can be in tandem. It doesn't have to be side by side. So the realities of our world is where people can find decent, affordable, and dignified housing. Parking is usually the last thing on their radar because most of them can't afford to own a vehicle, let alone support driving and insuring and taking care of one that way. So that's the direction that many are going. I can't say all of them are. Burlington is very much in line with Hamilton's, other than the allowance for parking side by side in front of the house is usually allowed because of lot lines and all the rest. Hamilton, it's hard to find because of the nature of the housing construction. Sometimes it's hard to find that allowance in the front of the house, but bylaws do allow people to drive around the side and park in the backyard, which I don't think we want either as a community, but those allowances are in our plans right now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and I know our staff is already reviewing accessory apartments and so forth in the context of zoning and as of right. But some of the challenges is it's very expensive in respect to windows below grade, egress, egress, firewalls, all the additional cost that you're putting into a rental unit versus a house that was designed and purposed for single-family living. You haven't addressed those kinds of costs in regards to...
I'd be very happy to, and thank you for the opportunity, Council, through you, Chair. The cost to build a legal apartment as compared to an illegal one, if you're going to do it right, you're looking at a difference of anywhere from 10 to 15% on materials. Labor is going to be very close to the same, because if you're putting up 5/8 drywall versus half-inch drywall, it's all in the same. But ultimately, you can budget for about 10 to 15% more. That additional investment lets me sleep at night, because I know that the units are fire separated from each other, that they're secure, that there's interconnected smoke alarms, that there's a smoke duct detector that will shut the furnace down if a fire is triggered in either of the two units, and my insurance company won't walk away from me if, touch wood, if anything were ever to happen. For that peace of mind, on a, let's call it a $60,000 investment, maybe 70, depending on the size, but in many Hamilton homes, I would suggest we're closer to the 50 to 60 range. To spend an extra $10,000 for that peace of mind is well worth it, and work from there.
I appreciate it. So the parking is an issue, and I'm not sure. I mean, I live in a court where a lot of townhouses, and I can tell you that the biggest complaint from residents is that the street parking in front of their homes is occupied on a regular basis. And in fact, they can't even have their visitors. They have to park a kilometer away because the parking in front of their homes are being utilized by the number of cars coming out of the townhouses. And so McIntosh is just crammed with cars all the way down and up, and Regent Street is clogged with cars up and down. Certainly creates problems in snow removal and narrowing of streets and so forth. You're indicating that the findings are that people don't have cars, because that's if that's the case, then we're talking about affordable housing in the context of townhouses. It's pretty clear that there's a lot more cars than there's parking availability.
Through you, Chair, definitely our society and its abundance of vehicles is something beyond this conversation, and it speaks to an audience that, quite honestly, isn't part of the group that I'm really trying to assist. As Councillor Farr asked, the reason that we are able to help those most in need is because we align with Halton Region to make sure that those in need of housing are coming in. Now, some of those tenants do have a vehicle. Rarely will they have two, but most of the time they have none, because they're getting their lives together so they can move forward in so many other ways. So I think if we were to focus on this initiative and really bring it to light and dovetail with the Hamilton housing waitlist and help make sure that we align our efforts to bring families to safer communities and prosperous communities, I don't anticipate, and who am I to speak? I think we'd have to look at higher minds, but I would not anticipate an abundance of vehicles over and above what might already be taking place in some neighborhoods. I think of Super Bowl Sunday, and I'm sure you might have had to be bused to your friend's house because you had to park so far away. And I see that in Burlington. I've seen it in parts of Oakville where there are a lot of townhomes. Keep in mind that the bylaws around legal accessory dwelling units, as a rule, are focused on detached homes. And that is a focus on residential communities that have detached homes, not clusters of townhomes. So I would not anticipate, unless bylaws were to change and we were to allow secondary suites in townhomes, which most municipalities do not, but some do now. But if we stay focused on the detached homes and encourage homeowners to look at moving in this direction, I will stand the ground, again, based on the audience that we wish to serve and the good that we can do, that there wouldn't be a parking issue inherent with that direction.
I appreciate that. The communities you cited are not post-secondary institutional communities, and I know that representing for 15 years an area where there's lots of accessory apartments, well too many. Yeah. The impact it has on neighborhood. How do you respond to that? I
will say that the areas, through you, Chair, sorry, I've worked in Guelph, which has a huge student population, and that's one of the reasons that they amended their bylaws to accommodate 145 square feet and up, because they realized if they didn't amend it, the illegal units would continue to be built. Oakville has a similar situation with the Sheridan College area, and other areas I've explored have that same issue. And I appreciate Ward 1 and Ward 8 here are the two catalysts for the student housing issue. Respectfully, I don't have the magic wand and an answer for that particular dilemma. Again, my focus is on, if it's going to be built, please build it legal, because fire separation at the end of the day and working smoke detectors and so forth are truly what's going to save lives and allow everyone to move forward with safety and security all the way around.
I appreciate it. I think Hamilton is moving in the right direction. We had a townhouse, a semi-detached on Stonechurch that had an illegal apartment when the new ownership took it over. They went through the whole process to make it legal, and I can tell you now there's a tenant living in there, and the good news, he doesn't have a car because it's only a single car driveway. Okay. But it's creating affordable housing for that individual, so we're moving in the right direction. Thank you.
Well, I'll certainly support in whatever way I can if it comes down that we need to reflect good news stories. I can certainly share them with you, and the families are so thankful for the opportunity they're given. So thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of quick questions, just trying to get a better understanding. So the recommendation from Mr. Brown is that secondary dwelling unit should not occupy more than 50% of the gross floor area of the dwelling within where it's located. What happens if it's a small cottage? We have houses in Hamilton which are actually rather small. So 50% of that would be a very small apartment.
You, Madam Chair, I have been in some of the smaller properties in Hamilton. Some of them don't even have full basements, or they might have dirt floors for basements. Exactly. And certainly without serious investments on underpinning and other extremes, those particular properties would likely not be appropriate for this direction. It would be the homeowner's decision as to whether or not to create and make that investment, but ultimately it wouldn't necessarily serve the purpose. And on the flip side of that, perhaps following Kitchener's guidelines of having a minimum of 145 square feet would be a way of offsetting that concern. The up to 50% that I've shared is an opportunity to maximize whatever space is available to provide finished livable space in a basement. You'll see some municipalities use 40% as that figure, but I encourage you to consider 50%, because apart from the mechanical room, which would house the furnace, the water heater, and possibly a water softener, and the shared laundry area, the rest of that basement could be fully utilized and provide a very comfortable environment for potentially a 1, 2-bedroom, and I've even created 1 3-bedroom unit in a basement in Burlington. And it's, right to this day, the family that's moved in is still in there today and loving it. So I appreciate your point, Councillor Clark, because definitely there will be some properties that, without the right parameters in place, would not be suitable to invest in or create those units.
So given that, Madam Chair, has Mr. Brown considered what the minimum square foot that he thinks would be appropriate for a secondary suite?
Through you, Chair. I'm looking at 145 as an example from Kitchener and Guelph to be the minimum. That provides a bachelor unit with a decent environment to live in. And again, respectful of the huge need that is upon us, we have to change our mindsets as to what a home needs to look like. Right? It doesn't have to be 2,000 or 3,000 square feet. We've got condos just down the street here being built much, much smaller. And we have a huge need that will not change. It's only going to grow as time goes on if we don't change our mindsets and say, let's create these units that we know are safe and that we know can provide dignified housing, affordable housing for those who most need it.
Finally, I just want to thank Mr. Brown for speaking to us today. I have full expectations that staff will be coming in with some minimum square footage for secondary suites, because that would be the most appropriate in terms of how you actually enforce the bylaw prudently across the entire city. So when the residential zoning bylaw is made public, you may want to be prepared to comment at that time, because it will be dealing with secondary suites. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Farr.
I was just receiving, and then I was going to have staff just offer for the record an update on what Councillor Clark was just talking about. So I'll move to receive.
So thank you. Then motion to receive, moved by Councillor Farr, second by Councillor Clark. All in favor? And we don't have to, that's fine there. And then I'll turn back to Councillor Farr. Do you want to?
And with thanks. So you're okay now. You're good to sit down. We really do appreciate you coming by.
Thank you very much, Councillor Farr.
And for the record, through you to our director, Mr. Robichaud, if you could help provide Mr. Brown an update on where we're at with the residential zoning bylaw and how your good work and staff's good work to date may correspond and correlate to what we've just witnessed in this presentation and read in this document.
Through the ward councillor, through you, Madam Chairman, you are correct. The City of Hamilton planning staff are working on updating our zoning bylaw, the residential component of the zoning bylaw. We're focusing on the low-density residential areas right now, and within that, the primary focus is on accessory units and secondary suites, and bringing forward a white paper and then having public consultation on what should be appropriate regulations for secondary suites on a city-wide basis, because they are only permitted right now in the City of Hamilton. So we want to look at those other municipal zoning bylaws and what updates are required, as well as how we develop appropriate zoning regulations in 05200 for secondary suites. As you may also recall, last year we brought forward the Laneway Housing Initiative. So now within portions of the lower City of Hamilton as well as Dundas, laneway housing is now permitted as of right. And also 2 years ago, we updated our parkland dedication requirements to lower the parkland dedication fee for accessory units. Before they were paying $1,500 or $2,000 per unit, and I believe that fee was lowered to approximately $750 per unit to be adjusted by inflation. And then finally, coming out of the discussions on the fee bylaw that was presented earlier this year, staff are looking at an interim fee that would apply if a property owner within Stony Creek or Dundas wanted to come forward to add an accessory unit, and that it would be a fee that would not be a barrier for that applicant to make that application, but reflect the cost to basically to do a fairly routine administrative type zoning change. And then the final element, the province is having consultations and discussions about how to increase the housing supply in Ontario. And through those discussions, staff are meeting with the province to talk about the issue of accessory apartments, what changes might be necessary at the building code in order to help facilitate that. Because one of the things that we're hearing is that property owners are often reluctant to make an application for a building permit because of the fear of unknown, not knowing what they need to do to recognize and to legalize that unit. Because at the end of the day, health and safety and fire protection is the essential, is a very important goal, and that's what we want to make sure that happens within the City of Hamilton, that nobody is living in an unsafe housing arrangement.
Thank you, everyone. So that's all been moved and received. Thank you for the information. We're going to go on now to item 8.4. Linda Lukasik, Environment Hamilton, respecting Bill 66. Linda, please come on down. You're aware also that it's 5-minute rule. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson Pearson and members of committee. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today. I wanted to take this opportunity on behalf of Environment Hamilton to speak to the City of Hamilton planning staff regarding Schedule 10 of Bill 66. First, I want to express thanks to planning staff for preparing such a thorough report. We did share the report in our environmental non-governmental organization network across Ontario, others who are working on Greenbelt issues, and got lots of positive feedback on how in-depth the report was. We strongly agree with the majority of the opinions planning staff have set out in the report. Schedule 10 is a deeply problematic piece of proposed legislation on so many levels. However, there is one piece I would like to urge Planning Committee to reconsider, and that's Part B of the staff recommendation, which reads as follows. that the City of Hamilton recommends that as an alternative to the proposed open for business planning bylaw as established by the province in Bill 66, the province amends Section 47 of the Planning Act to remove the allowance for appeal of a minister's zoning order. And I would just, we just want to raise this because if we've learned anything at Environment Hamilton over the years, it's that it's never wise to give up the right to appeal a decision when such a right exists. So I'm respectfully suggesting that Planning Committee not endorse this portion of the staff report, the staff recommendation regarding Bill 66. I don't believe you want or need to give up that appeal right to a minister's zoning order, should one ever be proposed within the municipality. I also wanted to take the time here today to urge you to pass a formal resolution to let the province know that the City of Hamilton does not support Schedule 10 of the bill. As far as we know at this point, and if anyone has an update, I'd like to hear it. I've still only seen that commitment in the form of a series of tweets from the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing. So pretty optimistic it will go through, but we still think it would be wise and prudent to formalize opposition to the schedule. And there are plenty of examples of resolutions already passed by other Ontario municipalities that you could refer to. For instance, City of Toronto just passed a resolution on January 31st. That is very straightforward. And they did not limit their opposition to Schedule 10. And the other thing I wanted to raise here today is that I don't think the City of Hamilton should either. So while you're considering a resolution regarding Schedule 10, we urge you to also consider including Schedule 5 of Bill 66, which proposes the repeal of Ontario's Toxics Reduction Act. And I realize this may not be the committee to raise this concern at, but honestly, I'm not aware of how the city is considering the other 11 schedules of Bill 66. So I'm raising it here in the hopes that maybe you can help to navigate us through the system on this one. So we did, as Environment Hamilton, submit formal comments to the province in opposition to their plans in Schedule 5. And I just want to quickly give you a sense of why we did that. As you all know, Hamilton is a city with a heavy industrial core and an extensive base of manufacturing facilities. EH has worked for many years to see these facilities make improvements to reduce their emissions to air, land, and water, and this has included pushing for greater openness and transparency so that Hamiltonians living in neighborhoods near the industrial core have information about what their industrial neighbors are doing, what risks and challenges are associated with these activities, and most importantly, what efforts are underway at these facilities to minimize and ideally eliminate any environmental impacts from these operations. Ontario's Toxic Reduction Act and associated regs represent a really important piece in the ongoing effort to increase openness and transparency and realize progress in reducing and or eliminating the use and release of harmful substances from industry wherever possible. So there's an important occupational health and safety element here too. We have had the opportunity to review the very detailed submission on Schedule 5 prepared by the Canadian Environmental Law Association, and I'd encourage anyone who's interested to do the same. I just want to read a portion of what CELA said because I think they've really pointed out so effectively why the Toxics Reduction Act is so important. The purpose of the TRA, the Toxics Reduction Act, is to prevent pollution and protect human health and the environment by reducing the use and creation of toxic substances and informing Ontarians about toxic substances. Pre-TRA legislation in Ontario, for instance, the Environmental Protection Act and the Ontario Water Resources Act, focused on and continue to focus on pollution abatement, not pollution prevention. So that's an important difference. This problem explained and continues to explain why Ontario's emissions of toxic substances to air, land, and water are some of the highest in North America. So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today.
Just under the wire, Linda. Very good job. Thank you. I have Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have one question that's been kind of gnawing at me. So historically, the Planning Act is equal across the board for all municipalities in the province of Ontario. This particular bill creates an opportunity whereby each municipality can, by utilizing a municipal bylaw, exempt themselves from certain Planning Act and other acts for the goal of opening up and providing more employment. Can you comment on the potential downward spiral we may choose not to proceed with any of these processes, but our competitors begin to proceed with these processes, and in order to compete with them to bring in warehouses or industry, we are forced to actually begin providing such open for business bylaw exemptions.
Through you, Chairperson Pearson. Yes, and this is something that city staff acknowledge, that there's a real danger there in that sort of inconsistent approach from one municipality to the next. So you may have Hamilton, you know, if Schedule 10 did go through, Hamilton deciding not to go there, not to use that power, but an adjacent municipality making that decision. And there could be problematic impacts on a number of levels, on a competitiveness level, but also in terms of potential environmental impacts because of some of what you've stated there in terms of the legislation that the provincial government seemed willing to allow municipalities to ignore through Schedule 10.
And in my read of the Act, Madam Chair, I can't see anything in the Act that provides any protection for unintentional consequences if the Clean Water Act was exempted, or the Great Lakes Water Act was exempted for an industry in a municipality, of how other municipalities may have to be dealing with outflows and issues that come from that. There doesn't seem to be any opportunity for other municipalities to challenge it, short of seeking legal injunctions.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. I think the term "the devil is in the details" is very appropriate here. So, and again, I think that was a concern raised by multiple municipalities. We looked at a lot of reports, and there was a lot of concern raised about the lack of detail in terms of how would this zoning bylaw work? What would the rules be around it? And I think municipalities and organizations and other players were rightly concerned in pointing out that there wasn't enough detail there to really understand how this was going to work on the ground.
Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you. Seeing no other speakers, thank you, Linda, for that. And
thank you. Oh.
Sorry, thank you. Yes, so I'll have a motion, and Councillor Whitehead, motion to receive. Moved by Councillor Whitehead, second by Councillor Clark. All in favor? Thank you, everyone. We're going to move on now to item 10. Thank you, Linda. Is 10.1, and members of committee, we are now on item 10.1. This is a non-statutory public meeting for an official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment for lands located at 41 Stewart Street, Hamilton, PED 19028, Ward 2. As this is not a statutory public meeting under the Planning Act, and as the application has been appealed, the matter is in the hands of the Local Planning Appeal Tribunal, LPAT, and Council is not in a position to make a decision regarding the applications. The item is on the agenda to provide an opportunity to the public to speak to these applications, and the public input received will be referred to staff. So does committee wish to see the staff presentation? Councillor Farrar? Okay. So then there's been an indication that yes. So I'm going to ask Derek Keller to come down to the podium.
It's appropriate. When I looked at the report, there's looks like a resident that emailed and requested whether the detailed plan was sent out to him. Obviously, he wasn't speaking on behalf of the whole community. So there's a letter there. Just wondering if that was ever followed up on.
There's several pieces of correspondence.
Yeah, I'm reading Como, I think his name.
So then why don't we let the planner present, and then he can answer that?
Okay, fair enough.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Clark? Push it. Sorry, Councillor.
It's okay. So I'm not sure whether or not I asked the questions now, but I'm trying to understand this process of a non-statutory public meeting. So perhaps you can put me on the docket to ask that question of staff.
Well, maybe it'd be appropriate that they answer the process now so that we understand it going in.
So, Madam Chair, from my understanding, this has been appealed to LPAT, and I'm trying to understand what the non-statutory public meeting is really about, because from my understanding, it doesn't actually play into LPAT. It may give residents the opportunity to speak, but they're not speaking to the decision maker. They're speaking to council. They're speaking in public, but LPAT actually makes the decision.
Mr.
Through you, Madam Chairman, to the Board Councillor, you are correct. Carriage of this matter is essentially being transferred from the City of Hamilton to the Administrative Tribunal. They will then have to make a determination on whether or not the city, whether the application should be approved or denied. The concern that came out during the last term of council was that in many cases, applicants were bypassing the community and the opportunity for public input into the application process by making the non-decision appeal. And in response to that concern, there was a direction from council to provide for an opportunity where we would bring forward the matter for committee information purposes essentially, and it would give planning committee and council an opportunity to hear from the residents and other affected landowners on whether they were in support or opposition as it related to the application. And that would assist council, or be additional information that committee and council would have when making a decision as to what direction to provide legal staff, whether to advise the LPAT that the City of Hamilton does not support the application, or that they support the application, or that they're seeking modifications to the application. So this is an opportunity for the public to better understand what the application is about, and for the members of committee to hear from the affected adjacent landowners, as well as the applicant has an opportunity to speak on the particulars of the application. And as per the amended recommendation, that the information that's presented today from the public will be referred to the LPAT for the LPAT's information. The LPAT may ignore the public input that they get today, or they may consider it in their decision-making exercise, but that'll be a decision of the LPAT. But primarily, this is to give residents and landowners an opportunity to participate in the process, because they've effectively been bypassed by the appeal for a non-decision to the LPAT on this particular matter. And that was a direction that came out of council, previous term of council, and I believe there was an in-camera report also earlier this year that talked about providing legal withstanding instructions on how to deal with these non-decision appeals. The LPAT is a completely different framework than under the OMB situation, where essentially it's really just between the city and the applicant, and all the other parties are more or less excluded from the process, or they have limited rights to or opportunities to participate in the process. So essentially what we are trying to achieve here is the opportunity for the public to speak to council or planning committee and provide that their opinion or their position on this matter, so that committee has all of the information from the various stakeholders at the time that they're seeking to provide direction to legal as to how to proceed with this matter. So you are correct. The public cannot appeal the decision, what comes out of this. Essentially, there is no decision is being made other than to providing direction to legal as to how to proceed forward.
And so do we take into consideration where the application is in the LPAT process? Because their procedural rules are pretty prescriptive in terms of how they receive evidence.
Through you, Madam Chairman, that would be just part of the consideration. So ultimately, we have to put a responding record together in terms of the applicant's submission. Essentially, then it would be whether that responding record would be to, approve or not support or not support the proposal as it relates to the non-decision appeal. One of the issues that we do have is that if staff are coming forward with a denial of an application, especially if they pass those statutory non-decision appeal timelines, as soon as the applicant becomes aware that we are proceeding to a public meeting to consider a denial of the application, and legal staff can speak a little bit more, there's a rush to appeal for a non-decision as opposed to having council making a decision on the application, because a non-decision appeal has different rules of procedure, as my understanding, than if council actually denied the application. So in this case, we advised the applicant that we would be coming forward with a negative staff report, and that there would be notice would be given in the newspaper to meet the Planning Act requirements. And as soon as they subsequently, once they became aware that we were going to be staff were recommending denial of the application, they proceeded to appeal the application to the LPAT for non-decision. So that's how we ended up to where we are today. The report had been prepared, the notice had been prepared, and we had actually, in the council process, we mail out copies of the report at the same time as we give the notice to anybody who wrote in, so it was in the public domain that planning staff were not supportive of the application, and that's why the applicant elected to use their rights under the Planning Act to make a non-decision appeal as it relates to this particular file.
So specifically on this application, has the appellant provided their evidence to LPAT, and have we provided our response to that evidence?
Through you, Madam Chairman, at this point in time, it's my understanding, no, it has not proceeded to that. The non-decision appeal has been submitted, and then we have to forward that information to the LPAT and start compiling that public record at this point in time.
Thank you. So, Madam Chair, I'm fine with this on this process, but it would be helpful if we knew in advance where the process is at LPAT, because I'm really concerned that we end up wasting people's time. If they've already filed their evidence package and we filed ours, there's no cross-examination, so it really becomes a feigned public consultation because we can't impact it at that point. The process has already started. In this case, we haven't filed our briefing notes, so the public comments can actually help us with our commentary. I'm not sure how in the future we ensure that that happens promptly so that we don't lose that opportunity. Their rules at LPAT are insanely prescriptive.
Through you, Madam Chairman, you are correct, and part of that is why there's actually a court case going on right now in terms of the stated case as it relates to the LPAT. But I think from a first principle, and that's why we do the monthly reports in terms of the status of the applications, if we think that we are not going to be able to reach an agreement, we are trying to get the applications to Planning Committee before the non-decision appeal dates, so that way that Council can make a decision on the merits of the application, whether to approve it or deny it, and try to avoid the situation that we're currently in where there's been an appeal filed. So I think given that, you may see more applications coming forward where staff are recommending a denial simply because we're trying to manage the file management as well as the case management issues and protecting the city's interests through that LPAT process. So that's just how it's our first response to avoid being the non-decision appeal being filed in the first place.
Thank you, Mr. Robichaud. Thank you, Madam Chair. I needed some clarification, and I think it's helpful before we get into the actual delegations.
It helps understanding the context as well. Thank you, Councillor Farr.
Yeah, it might be appropriate then now having that Q&A just before Mark gets going to get on the record how it is we're at a non-decision. I've been part of several public meetings on this file over many years now that all started with our friends from the Central Neighborhood Association at Mulberry Cafe. That had to be 4 years ago. But we are at a point of a non-decision, and the applicant, who now an appellant, who just very recently have filed, it did so well within their rights, but we are here, albeit not as a statutory meet on this particular agenda item, so it'd probably be good to get on the record at this time, through you, Madam Chair, to Steve, how it is we landed, given all the efforts on both sides, at a non-decision.
Through you, Madam Chairman, as you would notice in the chronology of the application, staff have been working with the applicant. We receive the application, we undertake a review, we provide our comments and our feedback back to the applicant. Generally, in the situation we seek, is there an opportunity to address those comments in terms of the overdevelopment? Staff's position is that it's an overdevelopment of the site, to see what the opportunities there are for the applicant, either to reduce the mass, height, and the bulk of this development. And then we wait and respond to how the applicant will then respond to the feedback being provided by staff. I think the issue has come out is the number of units, the size of the units, and as well as the overall massing of the building on this property. So based on the last conversation we had with the applicant, it became clear that we would not be able to reach a mutual agreement on this redevelopment proposal, and that's why we proceeded with the staff report and scheduling this for a planning committee to consider the recommending denial of the application. But we did try to work with the applicant multiple times during the process.
With that, Mark, good morning.
Good morning, Chair and members of committees, staff and members of the public who are in attendance. My name is Mark Kaler. I'm the city planner assigned to this file. So we're here to have a non-statutory meeting to discuss an official plan amendment and rezoning application at 41 Stewart Street in Hamilton. The applicant has applied to amend the setting sail secondary plan to from a local commercial designation to a mixed-use designation, and to establish a special policy area to permit 11-story building height. Also, they've proposed to rezone the lands from a J, which is a light and heavy industry district, to a CR1 commercial residential district with site-specific modifications, again, for an 11-story building. with 76 dwelling units, 66 square meters of commercial at grade, and 56 underground parking spaces. So the subject lands are located within a stable residential neighborhood. They're just to the south of the West Harbor GOAT station. Further to the east, you can see Leona Station, James Street North. And again, surrounding the property is primarily single detached and semi-detached dwellings, as well as this is Workers Arts and Heritage Center. It's in the former Hamilton Customs House, and there's a 6-story multiple dwelling to the southwest. It's known as the Witten Lofts. So the subject lands have an area of approximately 1,250 square meters. Again, they're on the southwest corner of Stewart Street and McNabb. There's entrances on both Stewart and McNabb. So you can see there'd be a small cafe at the corner as well, bicycle storage, residential amenity on the ground floor, and then there would be the access to the underground parking would be off of McNabb to the south of the site. Also, there would be a residential amenity area at the rear of the building at the 5th story. So the total height of the building would be, again, it's 11 stories, 37 meters to the top of the penthouse, 34 meters to the roof of the building. And there's a step back at the 5th floor. The podium itself was, through earlier consultations with staff, was designed to complement the Customs House. So the height of the podium, as well as the cornice lines, were designed to complement that building. So staff do not support this proposal as submitted. It's our opinion that the building height, massing, and scale are not compatible with the surrounding stable residential neighborhood. The lands are within setting sail, and they're within an area identified as a stable area. And the stable area components of setting sail are, again, low-density residential areas in which extensive change is not anticipated. Also, for the community's information, these subject lands, together with the south abutting site, were identified as an opportunity site in the James Street North Mobility Hub study that was adopted by Council in 2013. The study did recognize that the lands are very close while they're adjacent to the GO train station, and as a result recommended a maximum building height of 6 to 8 stories. And again, that was combining the 41 Stewart lands with the adjacent property to the south, which would have provided greater opportunity for transition. So it's staff's opinion that the recommendations of the Mobility Hub study were designed to address both the need for intensification adjacent to the GO station, together with the need to preserve the character of the surrounding area. So it is our opinion that the proposal does not comply with the West Harbor Setting Sail secondary plan with respect to building height, scale, and massing, and that the proposal is also not in line with the recommendations of the Mobility Hub study. I can just go through some photos of the area just to give you a sense, again, of that character. So this is the subject lands viewed from Stewart Street and McNabb, looking southwest. So you can see the east portion of the property is a parking lot surrounded by a fence. You can see in the background, that's the Witten Lofts. And this here is the Workers' Arts and Heritage Center, the Hamilton Customs House, which is a National Historic Site. This is the existing one-story building on site. It's a former manufacturing building from the early 1900s. It's currently being used for offices and I believe a commercial print shop. It would be demolished through the application. Here's a photo of the Hamilton Customs House. To the south, there's single detached dwellings, and you can see Wittenloss again in the background. So yeah, the property line would be here, directly adjacent to this bungalow. And then towards the northeast, this is the entrance to the West Harbor GO station. The bus terminal, I guess, is further over to the south. Directly across the street to the east is a vacant lot. We have an application on those lands as well that's being processed, and then a Romanian Orthodox church. And then further south, more detached dwellings. And finally, this is the Wittenloss building to the southwest. It has, the first floor is partially below grade, and then there's 5 stories above. The height of this building is approximately 25 meters to the roof and 29 to the mechanical penthouse. So finally, as was mentioned before, the applicant appealed the application on January 18th, which was the same day that notice was provided in the Hamilton Spectator. As such, we proceeded with a non-statutory public meeting to allow the public an opportunity to comment on the proposal. Staff do not support the proposed development as submitted. The official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment do not comply with the West Harbor setting sail secondary plan with regards to matters including but not limited to building height, compatibility with the character of the surrounding neighborhood. The existing parts of the secondary plan and the City of Hamilton's zoning bylaw that would be affected by the applications are not inconsistent with provincial policy, do not fail to conform or conflict with provincial plans, and do not fail to conform with the applicable official plan. And that concludes staff's presentation.
Thank you for that, Mark. And my roadmap says that we go to the public delegations next. So I will move forward and just ask that we move to receive presentation. Moved by Councillor Farr, second by Councillor Danko. Sorry. And we just received. All in favor? Carried. Thank you, everyone. So moving on now to registered delegations. I'm going to invite delegations. So if you're wishing to speak to this item, please come down to the podium. And you'll have to write your name, address, and telephone number in the book provided. I also have a registered speaker. It's Lachlan Holmes. You wish to come forward first? Councillor? Thank you. It's all here, don't worry.
All right, hello everyone. I will say that I wrote this speech before I knew that it was appealed to the LPAT, so not everything's perfect. But as always, I'd like to thank you for allowing the committee to speak today, allowing me to speak. As you're aware, I'm here to speak today to the rezoning and official plan amendment for 41 Stewart, and I have some concerns about the recommendation of denial. Now, we'll start with a look at this from a strictly urban planning viewpoint. The proposed project is directly across the road from the main entrance to the new West Harbor GO station. In addition, the project is within a 5-minute walk from the multiple HSR routes, the Bayfront, the A-Line, and in the summer, the waterfront trolley. As well, the site is just a 15-minute walk away from the downtown and all the HSR lines that connect to the downtown. Make no mistake, this is a deeply urban site. This is partially why I'm concerned and puzzled about the opposition to the project. Further, the justification for denial hits a few key notes. One, cited in the rationale, is the following. The proposed 11-story, 34-meter building height does not meet the intent of the setting sail plan, which envisions and recognizes to enhance the scale and character of the existing residential area. 2, also cited in the rationale, is the proposed 11-story proposal is not in keeping with the prevailing scale, massing, and building heights adjacent to the subject lands. In staff's opinion, the proposal does not recognize and enhance the scale of the existing residential area. The recurring theme in the proposal is that the building is too tall, the massing is too dense, and the proposal does not recognize or enhance existing neighborhood character. From my perspective, I believe all 3 official justifications against the project are short-sighted and incorrect. First, I believe the height to be acceptable and commendable for a project so close to higher order transit, in this case GO Transit, and potentially even a future A-Line LRT. Second, I believe the massing of this project to be both appropriate and thoughtful. I have seen the renderings for the project, and the podium height is flush with the Hamilton Customs House next door, and the materiality is extremely complementary to the next door National Historic Site. Third, I do not believe that I believe the justification does not fit within that this project does not fit within the current neighborhood character to be extremely disappointing. If we continue to let the neighborhood character straw man kill good development, what attitude are we projecting? Next, we have to address this housing supply impacts of this project. So should this project be denied, you are delaying or worse, removing 76 new attainable condominium units from the market. As I see it, we no longer have a choice to prioritize lower heights, gentler density, lack of shadows, or preservation of neighborhood character over new housing supply. The shortage has gotten out of hand, and we need to focus on returning some sanity to housing costs in Hamilton. I believe we need to increase the supply of every type of housing in Hamilton, be it below market subsidized housing, purpose-built rental, or condominium. In this case, I support the increase of condo supply because these units will permit more middle-class Hamiltonians to move out of the rental market and into the ownership market and lower competition in the existing rental market while we build more rental housing. Finally, I have concerns that a denial would be upheld at the Local Planning Appeal Tribunal. The staff report indicates that the proposal complies with both the provincial policy statement and provincial growth plan. I do worry that if this denial is appealed to the LPAT, we will be forced to waste taxpayer dollars on a fight which we will lose. And whether or not a denial would be upheld at the LPAT, we will be delaying the speed in which this housing supply would come online, and worse, stopping it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Lachlan. Councillor Farr, question to the presenter?
Yeah, thanks, Lachlan. Really appreciate you being here and your advocacy for high-rise development, obviously, and as a downtowner. I read the recent article from the CBC and learned more about you, and I expect, given this advocacy, that you'll come to see us often as a delegation, and you're always welcome. Through you, Chair.
Thank you.
Did I hear you say near the end, can we get a copy of your delegation today? I see you've typed it out.
You're welcome to take a copy.
We'll get one, and so I'm clear. I thought I heard you at the end say, you know, with the shortages, we ought not to say no to something of this scale because it's 76 new condos. So it sounded like you're saying, let's not worry about sun, shadow, neighborhood character, and you listed a number of things. Can you repeat that part just so for my own clarity through you?
So officially I said, I don't think we have a choice to prioritize lower heights, gentler density, lack of shadows, or preservation of neighborhood character over new housing supply.
Okay.
And I basically believe that the most pressing issue is the supply of housing, and you know there has to be a clear priority list, and that the #1 priority has to be ensuring that everyone in Hamilton can afford their housing.
Right, and I do understand the point you're trying to make, but I wonder if I don't think you would have been part of the public consultation some 20 years ago that evolved and became an official secondary plan, the setting sail secondary plan. So you probably, through you, Chair, were not part of that consultation process. Were you at all part of the Jamesville Mobility Hub?
I was not.
A consultation. There was hundreds of people at Leuna Station over a course of a few meetings. No, you were not? Okay. Through you, Chair. So it's from the 2 plans identified that we will mount our defense. I'm not going to get into any great conversation on how that will play out at LPAT. That's not appropriate here. It's non-statutory. But we're trying to share that we're appreciating both these local plans. While you noted the provincial policy statement and so forth, through you, the setting sail secondary plan and particularly to the Jamesville Mobility Hub, which is referenced, through that work, through consulting with neighbors, with people from the area, said, okay, we could probably do 6 to 8. This is 11, essentially.
Yep.
So given your prevailing theme, I think, today, in the past, and probably in the future on high-rise development and what you reiterated for my own clarity here today, where does that fit in for you personally, to that bungalow guy next door or to the Custom House who are quite obviously concerned, and I'm sure you read their concerns in today's report.
Yeah, I did.
How about the hundreds of people from the Roman Orthodox Church across the street that are signed a petition that are part of this agenda? Where do they fit in? And many of these people have engaged in the past that led us to the Jamesville Mobility and the Setting Sail Secondary Plan. So through you, just your thoughts on that as a proponent of larger scale developments.
Well, I think it's very important to be respectful of the surrounding neighborhood, but I also think that, you know, you have to be reasonable about it. And, you know, when talking about the Hamilton Customs House next door, I know there was some concern with shadowing on their back park. But you also have to take into account, you know, this is, you know, it's, to me, I believe that it's a bit more of a luxury to be prioritizing lack of shadows when the answer to housing is primarily more supply. And I think, you know, they have made efforts to accommodate the neighbors, and, you know, along with the staff, they say that the building height is respectful of the podium height is respectful of the next door Hamilton Customs House. And there are some setbacks. I assume you'd like some more, but I just generally believe that it is obviously a balancing act, but you have to, in my opinion, put a bit more weight on the side of supply and housing affordability. And also there's the nearby 6-story building, which is apparently for the most part 25 meters. So it's only about a 13-meter difference from the top height of this proposed building and the 6-story building just on the other street. So
yeah, a different grade too, come down to the water. Through you, Chair. Okay, so you know what's there now, and the 6 to 8 that the Jamesville Mobility Hub contemplates. With all the good stuff that you'd attach to an approval such as that was born of hundreds of people engaging over many years, and the Setting Sail Secondary Plan. So we're not saying no to what you're after. We're saying no to 11. We're saying, well, let's talk about 6 to 8. And in fact, the proponent's been great. The community has been very vocal. We're not here today for a lack of engagement and conversation. It's just never, unfortunately, there are those occasions where you just can't come to a compromise, and you can't, and sadly, this is one of those cases. And so the proponent is exercising their right. The community is going to watch with interest, especially those among the many who have engaged over many years. But no one's really saying no. It's just they're saying no to the 35 meters or the 11 stories versus what years of engagement resulted in, which is still above and beyond light industrial use or whatever it is there right now. So I just wanted to make it clear that I hear you. I really do appreciate, and I'm almost at the point where I'm going to follow you regularly, Lachlan, and I do expect and I would appreciate that you continue to come back and share your points of view, and I hope your group, through you, Chair, maybe give it a plug, because I understand it's growing now.
Hamilton Forward, yeah, we're growing.
Hamilton Forward?
Hamilton Forward has been growing ever since the article, and yeah, we do hope to become more active.
Yeah, well, and I hope you do too, because you do make some great arguments, and there are places where I'm sure we'll be aligned, different little pockets throughout downtown and Ward 2. Unfortunately, today, I'd have to say this isn't one of them, and it wasn't for lack of effort or engagement. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councilor Wilson. Thank you very much, and thank you for your participation and your obvious passion for everything that's urban. I think it's wonderful. I just wanted to make clear I understood what the remarks you were saying and some sort of causality. You were talking about supply and upzoning, and you seem to be implying the link to affordability. Would you like to expand on that?
Well, yes, I do believe that overall, the biggest move that we can take as a city to fighting for more affordable housing is increasing the supply of housing. Now, it won't do everything. We have to invest in subsidized housing too, but we have to meet the needs of the people who can be served by the market rate housing. You know, the competition is growing for these ever shrinking number of apartment units that we have here, and condominium units, and we have a responsibility, I think, for people who are maybe they're making it by paying rent now, but with more affordable condominium units and, you know, regular market condominium units, that they have a chance to move out of the rental market, freeing up those rental units, and now they've been able to invest. So I do believe supply is one of the main keys to housing affordability.
Okay, granted supply, but I just haven't come across evidence myself in my preliminary work, look at this, that there is a link, automatic link between upzoning and affordability, because providing for affordable housing is not going to be a market-driven decision, right? It hasn't worked that way. And I think I read a study in Chicago that actually surprised even the author in dispelling that notion.
I've read the same study, and for one, I would say, you know, these parcel by parcel upzones are, for one, they're not perfect. I think we need to expand it on a broader scale. And also, that study didn't look at the rents, it only looked at the land prices. And even more so than just upzoning, I think we have to look at whether new housing construction, because upzoning alone does not inherently force or encourage construction. So there has to be a construction element to it.
Thank you very much.
Are you done, Councillor Wilson? Thank you. Okay, so motion to receive the delegation. And Lachlan, you're going to leave a copy of that for the clerk, please. And please sign in. I think, I don't know whether you have name, address, phone number, please. Okay, and I'll ask them, we'll receive at the end then. Next, we'll receive all of them. Yeah, so come forward, sir. Anyone else wishing to come forward, just be prepared. Write your name, address, and phone number in the book provided before or after you present. Good afternoon.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today here. I'm Father Lucian, Romanian Orthodox Church. Our parish was established 100 years ago, even though this is the second church, was built in 1959. And I'm here to express the serious concern of our parishioners about the new buildings proposed to be built around our church. First of all, because lack of parking. Right now, without these new buildings around, we struggle to find parking for our parishioners. And second, probably more important, we are concerned about the stability, the structure of our church, with the buildings proposed to be around us. I witnessed the construction of the train station, and I can tell you that our church suffered for that. Even when the train is passing by, the chandelier is moving. I cannot imagine what that would feel at 7 or 8 or 11 floors. So we are happy that this proposal was denied yet, and we ask for the support of the council to help us find parking around, and think of the future of our parish, because with these buildings around, we don't know what really gonna do. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Well said. Councillor Farr?
Madam Chair, I just want to thank Father for coming in. Appreciate it. Always appreciate your engagement. You have been very good in attending, and along with some of your parishioners, the community meetings on this particular site over the years. On the parking, through you, Chair, I just wanted to let you know that I've been advised just last week through a budget meeting that we'll have a full parking study for Q4 of this year, and your area will be included in that review, and Brian Hollingworth is leading that from our planning staff. So I know we've been talking about that for many years now, and it's difficult, especially when you have your special events, but we're definitely on it, and your area is included in that. So I just wanted to say thanks. Father, good to see you.
Thank you, Councillor Farr.
Thank you, sir. And thank you, Councillor. And the documentation that the parish has provided is in the package that staff have as well. Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak on this item? This is your opportunity. You have to come down if you wish to speak. State your name and address for the committee.
Yes.
And after you'll write it in the book.
Okay, my name is Elizabeth Ward, and I live in the Central Neighborhood area. I've been on the board of the Central Neighborhood Association now for about the past 8 years, and I've lived in Central for well over 30 years. And I don't have anything prepared, but I would just like to speak a little bit to the issue. And I was very pleased to hear what Councillor Farr had to say, and also from the Planning Committee, the Neighbourhood Association. First of all, I'd like to say really supports the need for increased density. That's been sort of one of our understandings and our mandates and what we've worked towards the whole time I've been on the board. We also understand the need for low-income housing in our neighborhood and really support the need for low-income housing, not just sort of building high-rises. We also are supporters of setting sail and are pleased to hear that setting sail has been adhered to, because so many times it hasn't. And the 8 and 9 stories that are proposed in setting sail, all over our community, there's been proposals for 11 and 12 stories which don't meet the setting sail parameters. So I'd like to say, and I think I can speak on behalf of our neighborhood association, that we're really pleased to hear today what council and the planning committee has had to say about 41 Stewart. We were also part of many of the meetings that Councillor Farr has talked about, have registered our concern. But I just wanted to really reiterate that we do support the need for increased density and the need for low cost and below market housing in our area, because we want our area to be a viable community that is welcoming to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Elizabeth. Okay. So, yeah, I'm just going to go out to the audience one more time. Is there anyone wishing, this is your last opportunity, if there's anyone here wishing to put comments forward on this application, come on down.
Good morning, Council. My name is Paul Consiglio. I live at 283 McNabb Street North, which is 2 doors down from the proposed building site. I'm just here to state my concern because this is a pretty grandiose project that is set for our neighborhood, and already the priest has brought up a good point. Parking is a nightmare. We have no parking. I've lived here for how many years, and it's just getting worse and worse. And with this, proposal of the building, I feel the parking situation is just going to get worse. And not only that, the area it's not suitable. Like, it's all houses, and then all of a sudden you got a church, and then you got this condo that's just right on the corner. And, you know, the sun, the shade, it's going to be a nightmare. And like I said, I'm concerned because when the GO station went up, there was significant damage to the properties around the area. There was cracks in our floors, ceilings. Also from the apartment at Stewart, when they built the condos there was problems with my retaining wall because my part of my house is directly behind it. And so the retaining wall is coming down when they started pounding on the ground and stuff. So my concerns are that this project is just going to be more problems for our area. Our area is already having problems with parking, having problems with, you know, you got a GO station that's there that's barely used. And, you know, it's like a lot of stuff was put into it and nothing really has come out of it. And so, like, I just want to say that I would like to see, like, even the 5-story or 5 to 8 stories is just a little too much for this area. So I just want to put in my 2 cents, and I thank you for your time. Thank you very much.
Well appreciated, and please be sure to sign in, name, address, and phone number. And I'm not seeing any more indication of anyone wishing to speak, so I am now going to close off to the floor, come back into committee. First off, may I have a motion to receive all of the delegations, moved by Councillor Farr, second by Councillor Clark. All in favor? Thank you. And motion to close the public meeting, moved by Councillor Whitehead, second by Councillor Partridge. All in favor? And then I have before us, we have an amending motion on the pink sheet. Everybody has it before you. Councillor Farr, I'm going to turn to you then. You're aware of this? Thank you. So you're going to be a mover and you have a seconder? Sorry, Councillor Farr, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. And moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Whitehead, the amendment to the recommendation of report PED 19028 respecting non-statutory meeting of an official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment for lands located at 41 Stewart Street, Ward 2, that the recommendations to report PED 19028 be deleted in its entirety and replaced with the following recommendations. A, that our city solicitor be directed to oppose the appeal for non-decision by King Stewart Developments, Inc., arising from its applications for official plan amendment application OPA 17-008 and zoning bylaw amendment ZAC 17-019 in accordance with the recommendations in Report LS 18054. B, that the Local Planning Appeal Tribunal, LPAT, be advised that the reason for council's opposition include, but are not limited to the following. Roman numeral I, that the proposed amendment to the West Harbor setting sale secondary plan does not conform with the policies and intent of the City of Hamilton official plan and the West Harbor setting sale secondary plan with regards to matters including but not limited to building height, massing, built form, and compatibility with the existing character of the surrounding neighborhood. And Roman numeral II, that the proposed change in zoning does not conform with the policies and intent of the City of Hamilton official plan and West Harbor setting sale secondary plan with regards to matters including but not limited to building height, massing, built form, and compatibility with the existing character of the surrounding neighborhood. And Roman numeral III, that the existing parts of the City of Hamilton official plan, the West Harbor setting sale secondary plan, and the City of Hamilton zoning bylaw 6593 that would be affected by the proposed official plan and zoning bylaw amendments are not inconsistent with provincial policy, do not fail to conform with or conflict with provincial plans, and do not fail to conform to the applicable official plan. Finally, C, that the written submissions received from the public regarding this matter be forwarded to the LPAT, and that is it. Seconded by Councillor Whitehead. I might actually ask through you to the appropriate staff, the clerk or legal, whether or not we should have a Part D that also highlights the delegations that we heard today as well, or is that not applicable? Through you, Chair, to whomever might help me with that.
Sorry? Okay, thank you. Through the chair, I think that can be incorporated into recommendation C.
Okay. So with that, then I'll say then C can be amended to say, or no, we'll just make C this. I don't think it needs to be amendment since it's on the floor now. That the written submissions received from the public in addition to public delegations at Planning Committee February 5th, 2019, regarding this matter be forwarded to LPAT. Excellent. And may very quickly, Madam Chair, say again, this is tough. The proponents, right from day one, they really didn't want to budge from what they'd planned. There is a pedigree here. This isn't one of those big bad developer scenarios and the hell with people's thoughts and opinions. They've gone out of their way to engage not only with me, but with many, many people in the community. They've had more than the required amount of meetings. They had a wonderful design initially, and then through many consults, which frustrated, unfortunately, the process, changed their designs based on input, not only from staff and heritage and respecting things like the Custom House next door and the surrounding area, but they also had a respect for, thoughts and opinions from our professionals on our side of the planning table on this particular file. The proponent, Vernon Shaw, actually was the fellow who, in our downtown at a time when not a lot of investments were occurring, was the front man behind the Pickett building renovation and restoration. And so, a lot of us are very grateful for all of the attention and the quality work from this particular proponent. And it's really unfortunate in situations like this when you're really talking about a difference of 10 or 15 feet and 3 or 4 floors that you can't come to a compromise and something that can be agreeable to most parties involved, in particular the residents in close proximity and the good people from the Roman Orthodox Church. Unfortunately, we're at that point. And so the proponent is exercising their right to appeal at LPAT. But here today, I'm obligated, given what all of this engagement and what all of the work from all of the parties has led us to, is to move the motion that's before us here today. But I do that, with the opportunity, obviously, that I just exercised to make my own opinions expressed in public on this matter. And I thank you for that opportunity, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A quick question. Does this preclude, certainly on the Ontario Municipal Board, you had an opportunity to sit down and have perhaps something mediated in regards to some form of a resolution without going into the actual hearing. Is that opportunity prevail here as well?
Through the chair, yes, there is an opportunity for mediation under the new processes as well.
So by passing this resolution, does this preclude direction to see if it could be mediated prior to going to full hearing?
Through the chair, no. You'll see reference here to the previous standing instructions to legal staff on appeals of this nature, and we do have standing instructions to take necessary actions for settlement and mediation if necessary.
I appreciate, because I think what I'm hearing to some degree that it's the built form is the issue. It's not about having residential housing there. And I think I heard, if it was 6 to 8, there might have been a support. And from that perspective, I would only say to the father, if you have your patrons actually living in that particular unit, then they wouldn't need a car and parking wouldn't be a problem. But I'm just saying that in a tongue-in-cheek way. But we need residents. When we build GO Transit, any study you ever read, we're supposed to be zoning, and I think we're trying to do that with LRT. I think it's called TOP, if I recall, but it's a form of zoning and building to ensure that you're taking full advantage of the rail systems, the mobility. And it's also very clear, because we've embarked on studies around Centennial, I believe, as well, that you want higher densities around this hard rail, and every study I've ever read said the highest densities and the biggest uplift, if there's going to be uplift, I'll park the LRT because it's more attributed to the hard rail, which is GO Transit. So I would think that that's the lens that we're looking through as well. So can I ask through the staff, just for clarity on that?
Through the chair, you're correct. And as we've been doing our updates to our official plan and secondary plan, zoning bylaws, we certainly look to focus more of the higher density uses adjacent to major transit infrastructure. I think that was the intent of the mobility hub study in particular, that we took a look at the James North area to try to get a little bit ahead of the GO station going in and becoming operational. And as was noted earlier, the site in question was identified as an opportunity site through that study for that reason. It is just a question of what is the appropriate scale and density.
Yeah, and I appreciate it. It's just ironic that we had one in the last planning meeting that was like outside of the scope for Centennial, and yet it was a justification for, massive density, and yet here, one right next to the station, we're trying to shrink it. So it's just ironic that that's what has happened here. Thank you.
So can I just get some clarification? Setting sail is the plan that we're making our decisions based on today.
Through the chair to the councillor, yes, that's correct.
And have we reviewed that plan in light of the existence of the new GO transit station?
Through you, Madam Chairman of the Board, Councillor, the intent is, I can sort of lay out the strategy. Once the matter, the Pier 7 and 8 OMB or LPAT appeals are done, we will then look at bringing forward the setting sail secondary plan into the Urban Hamilton official plan. As part of that exercise, we will then also be looking at updating the setting sail secondary plan to reflect the mobility hub study, which identified opportunity sites and intensification sites within the James Street corridor. So we're not suggesting that this site should not redevelop at a higher density than the current density. What we're just suggesting or recommending is how much or what should that density look like, as opposed to whether or not development should or should not occur on this site. And it's what the essence of the staff recommendation not to support the application is that the proposal represents an over-intensification or an over-development of this particular site. So I hope that answers your question.
I think so. So for my benefit, we haven't assessed the impact on GO Transit to the setting sail plan. And in fact, as we go forward, the densities could be higher on this property and others as a result of where the now new GO station is operational.
Through you, Madam Chairman, if I can clarify. So the setting sail was a secondary plan was adopted by council and ultimately approved by the OMB prior to the finalization of the mobility hub study. So the setting sail secondary plan, as it's currently enforced in effect, does not incorporate the recommendations of the mobility hub study. So that is why the applicant was advised that in order to implement the general direction coming out of the mobility hub study, an official plan amendment would be required. And that's what they made an application for, was an official plan amendment and change in zoning.
So how do we as a city defend our decision on setting sail when we haven't reviewed it with regards to the now impact of the new GO station? I mean, I listened carefully to what Councillor Whitehead was asking, and I think it's a prudent question. We're going into an LPAT hearing, and I'm assuming that they're going to be arguing that the proximity to the GO station means much higher density, and we're arguing setting sail, which is many years old.
Through you, Madam Chairman. The application, so the test really at the LPAT is, does the current planning instruments conform or conflict with provincial policy? And alternatively, does the applications conform or conflict with provincial policy? The applicant has indicated that the current planning instruments do conform with provincial policy. The LPAT no longer has that question or the test in front of it, how much intensification, just should intensification happen, and does our official plan and our planning instruments facilitate intensification? So whether that would be as simply as adding an accessory unit to an existing house or a redevelopment proposal for 100-unit multiple dwelling, they both represent intensification. The LPAT, we as a municipality get to make a determination as to what represents good planning on that. The provincial policy tests are whether or not our planning instruments facilitate the provincial goals of encouraging intensification and redevelopment. But there is no question as to the magnitude of how much intensification or redevelopment should occur within those areas. But we recognize from our planning instruments that we have a setting sail secondary plan and we have a mobility hub study, and we evaluated the application against both of those council adopted documents. So the mobility hub study provides some design guidelines and recommendations as to what form of redevelopment should occur to help inform a staff review of both a rezoning application and an official plan amendment application. The intent is, like I indicated, once we get a finalization of the Pier 7 and 8 OMB or LPAT process, we will then come forward with bringing the setting sail secondary plan into the Urban Hamilton official plan, and also doing a review to make sure that any necessary updates to that document will be brought forward for a statutory public meeting to consider changes to the setting sail secondary plan to reflect the Go Mobility Hub study. So it's really just a matter of timing, but we are cognizant of both of those documents, recognizing that the Go Mobility study was done specifically to look at how we should respond to the opportunities being created by the new Go station on James Street.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Robichaud. That's very helpful.
First of all, I want to thank the presenters, especially the articulation that I heard on the first presenter, and I forgot the name. And I would want to follow their front. It was actually very comprehensive, certainly showed a breadth of your understanding, and it was refreshing to hear new voices come forward from the residential community and make such a comprehensive and persuasive discussion. You didn't prevail, but I can tell you were heard. And that's important around this horseshoe, so I want to thank you for that. And just for clarification, you keep using Mobility Hub, and I always understood as TOP, Transit-Oriented Planning. Which one is it, or is it both?
You, Madam Chairman, both. They can be used interchanged in terms of the transit-oriented development. Would recognize whether it's a heavy rail situation, or also if it's in the situations like adjacent to an LRT corridor. The province uses the term mobility hubs around the major GO stations, so that's why we reference mobility.
Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, I'm going to ask now that we have the motion before. So on the motion, the motion, the amendment, all in favor? And it's electronic vote. Thank you, everyone. Okay, that carries. And then I'm going to ask now for a motion to approve the recommendation as amended. Moved by Councillor Farr, second by Councillor Collins. All in favor? Won't let me now. Sorry. Okay. Councillor Clark? Oh. Okay, that I believe carries. Thank you, everyone. Going to go on to thank you everyone for your time and patience of waiting and comments coming forward. Move on now to item 10.2, which is Bill 66, Restoring Ontario's Competitiveness Act 2018, Schedule 10 PED 19027, citywide. The report is before us. Did you wish a presentation? Heather Travis is here, Senior Project Manager, to answer any questions. So maybe I'll just go to committee for questions. Thank you.
Presentation. Don't need the presentation.
Okay, Councillor Whitehead then.
Thank you. So,
Heather, were you prepared to make a presentation? Thank you. If everyone wishes a presentation,
we'll do vote on that? Because the presentation is in front before us.
There's an interest in a presentation, so let's have the presentation.
Fair enough.
Okay. Yeah, I'll put you back on, don't worry. No, I'm okay. Go, Terry, go. Thank you. Thank you, Heather.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of committee. The report before you today presents staff's comments on Bill 66, Restoring Ontario's Competitiveness Act 2018, and in particular related to the Schedule 10 Planning Act changes. So on December 6, 2018, Bill 66 received first reading in the legislature. The bill was described as a measure to stimulate investment and cut red tape. The bill included amendments to a number of acts, including the Planning Act as part of Schedule 10 to the bill. The report and staff comments before you today focus only on the Schedule 10 Planning Act changes. The bill and 2 associated notices were posted on the Environmental Registry of Ontario, or the ERO, for comment until January 20th, 2019. The 3 postings that you see summarized on the slide are related and generally describe the new proposed planning tool referred to as the Open for Business Planning Bylaw and associated regulations for that tool. So as noted, the ERO notices had a commenting deadline of January 20th, 2019. Subsequent to that deadline, on January 23rd, 2019, the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing announced that the government would be withdrawing Schedule 10 from Bill 66. And the reason cited for this withdrawal was in response to a number of concerns raised by multiple stakeholders and municipalities. So the report before you today was prepared prior to this announcement of withdrawal, but just to note that the staff comments that are summarized in the report were submitted to the province prior to the January 20th deadline and were submitted prior to this announcement. So I'll summarize briefly what was proposed as part of Schedule 10, the Open for Business tool, and a quick summary of staff's comments. So the Schedule 10 Planning Act changes proposed to allow a municipality to pass what was called an Open for Business Planning Bylaw. The bill stated that the bylaw could be utilized for a prescribed purpose, but that prescribed purpose was not clearly defined in the bill, which was one of the concerns raised by staff. The Open for Business Planning bylaw would establish specialized zoning that would not need to comply with the city's official plan, would not need to be consistent with the provincial policy statement, and would not need to conform to many provincial plans, including the Greenbelt Plan, Clean Water Act, Places to Grow Plan, amongst others. Passage of the bylaw would not require public consultation and could not be appealed to the LPAT, and development approved under the bylaw would not require site plan control. The associated notices did provide a little bit more detail on the purpose of the bylaw. It was stated that the proposed bylaw was meant to provide a new economic development tool to allow municipalities to act quickly, to attract major employment opportunities, remove barriers, and cut red tape. And it was to be utilized at the discretion of the municipality, but would require approval of the minister. The regulation notice was vague, but it did provide some information on criteria that would have to be met if the bylaw was to be used. The municipality would have to confirm that there was a proposal for a new major employment use and that a minimum job threshold of 100 jobs for large municipalities was met. So I'll summarize quickly the comments that staff put forward. We did raise significant concerns with the tool as proposed. First and foremost, staff found that the Open for Business Planning bylaw, as put forward, was not a necessary tool for the municipality to use. As noted, the bylaw was intended to be a tool to streamline approvals of new major employment uses and cut red tape. But it's the opinion of staff that we already have a streamlined development approvals process in place. The city already has lands designated and zoned for employment uses. And we have a site plan approval process that is front-ended with conditional approval generally offered within 4 to 6 weeks. In addition, there's many provincial approval requirements that are a normal part of the development approval process, such as Ministry of Transportation permits or environmental compliance approvals. These were not exempted under the bill. These are often can be lengthy and cause delay in the approvals process. So it's staff's opinion that the bylaw as proposed may not actually meet its intended purpose in light of the lack of exemptions for these requirements. Staff were also concerned about the proposed exemptions in Bill 66. The bill identified portions of several acts which would not apply to the Open for Business bylaw, including the Greenbelt, Clean Water, and Great Lakes Protection Acts. Staff raised a concern that municipal councils would face pressure to permit development in areas that would normally be protected under this legislation. The bylaw could undermine protection for natural areas, water resources, and agricultural lands, and potentially incentivize development in protected areas. And of interest, the bill also included a very general exemption for the Open for Business tool to be exempted from any prescribed provision. That's a very vague statement and could allow the minister to override any law for any reason to allow an Open for Business bylaw to be passed. The exemptions also included exemptions to consistency with the provincial policy statement and the city's official plans. Staff note that the urban and rural official plans provide the land use planning framework to guide the growth and development of the city for the next 30 years. The city's urban structure is founded on directing employment uses to the city's business parks. Significant servicing and infrastructure investment has been made within the employment areas. And we're concerned about a potential impact on future viability and economic development of the business parks if employment uses are allowed to locate elsewhere. There's also a concern over creation of uncertainty in the real estate market. Really, it's related to uncertainty over land values if development is permitted to go where it's not currently designated or intended. And finally, staff did raise a concern also on really the lack of clarity on the prescribed purpose of Bill 66 and lack of clarity in the regulations that were put forward. As I noted, the bill stated that the Open for Business planning bylaw shall only be used for a prescribed purpose, but it did not provide details on that purpose. The vague language in the bill was concerning to staff, and there's a concern that it could allow for that bylaw to be used for purposes beyond employment in the future. And the regulations used vague language and did not provide details or provided very little detail on the criteria and information that would be required in order to use such a bylaw. So in light of the concerns raised, staff did put forward an alternative for consideration for the province, and that's related to the Minister's Zoning Order, or MZO. The MZO is a tool under Section 47 of the Planning Act. It's an existing tool which allows the minister to impose zoning on a property outside of the municipal approval process. It does not require consultation and can be quickly passed by the minister. Currently, it is subject to appeal by a municipality. The MZO tool does allow for expedited approvals, and removing the appeal rights would ensure that could occur in a timely fashion. This alternative was put forward because it would remove the onus from the municipality of having to undermine its own planning framework and remove the pressure put on municipal councils to allow development in locations not deemed appropriate. I do recognize and understand the concern that was put forward from the speaker earlier regarding this tool. Really, staff offered this as an alternative due to the significant concerns we had with the Open for Business planning bylaw as proposed. We offered this as an alternative in light of the province did want to have an opportunity to allow for expedited approvals. This is an existing tool that does not have the exemptions granted to it that the Open for Business bylaw does in terms of conformity with provincial plans. So it's a bit of a less blunt tool as what was being put forward by the province. It is a rarely utilized tool. And I think what needs to be clear is that as it currently stands, an MZO can be passed by minister. It is subject to appeal by a municipality. But if the province wishes to, they can declare it to be a matter of provincial interest and override that appeal right. So we were just saying you could skip that one additional step and would allow this to be a tool that could function as expediting employment uses. Again, we put this forward just because we did have significant concerns with what was being proposed as part of the Open for Business bylaw. So in the staff report before you, appendices A and B are the comments that city staff put forward. They were submitted prior to the January 20th deadline. And then the council decision on this report, including any changes made today by council, will be forwarded to the province. Again, the Schedule 10 has been withdrawn, or it's been stated that it will be withdrawn, but we could still follow up with additional comments if council wishes to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. I have a speakers list. Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you, and I also appreciate the fact that we've had this report with us for a bit and had an opportunity to read it thoroughly. So the question I have is, and you sort of addressed it, but my understanding is that, and I'm glad you articulated that ultimately the province can, even on a ministerial order, make the provincial argument, a provincial interest and avoid any appeal. But having said that, do we have any data on how often that tool has been exercised?
Through the chair, I don't have specific numbers. I know it's been used very, very rarely. Myself, I know of one instance in Hamilton, and it was to do with a proposed quarry application in Flamborough back in the late 2000, a number of years ago. I'm not sure there's any other.
Sorry, was that a scenario where it was just a ministerial order, or was it one that prevented the municipality from appealing the ministerial order?
Through the chair, it was both. The province, I believe, anyway, passed the MZO, and then a provincial interest was declared to ensure that it held up.
Through you, Madam Chairman, that is correct. There was 2 incidences I'm aware of a ministerial zoning order being enacted in Hamilton. There was at Flamborough Downs in order to establish the casino operation. And then the second one was in relation to the proposed quarry in Flamborough. In that case, the proponent requested the minister to refer the matter to the LPAT because they were opposed to the ministerial zoning order, which would have limited the use of that property to agricultural purposes. And then subsequent, that matter was referred to, the minister did refer it to the OMB. Then there were some negotiated settlements, but the minister's zoning order still stands, as well as, I believe there were some restrictive easements or covenants put on place. But as Heather indicated, the minister can always override the decision of the administrative tribunal by declaring a matter of provincial interest. So rather than going through in the case where we want a ministerial zoning order, then having to defend that decision at an LPAT or an OMB process, then why not just say that the minister's zoning order should be final and binding? What is important to remember, though, is a minister's zoning order is not exempt from provincial policy. Where under this Bill 66 open for business bylaw would have set aside any provincial policy when the minister would then authorize a municipality to enact a bylaw. And I think there was a huge disconnect between what the intent of Bill 66 when you read the EBR posting and then you actually looked at the legislative changes, because in the EBR posting they referred to it being used for employment, but when you actually went and looked at the proposed changes to the Planning Act, it essentially said is the municipality could petition council or the minister for permission to pass a bylaw that has set aside all provincial planning instruments as well as all local planning instruments anywhere in the municipality for any use prescribed in that bylaw. And that was the concerns why it could be misused to essentially pave over the greenbelt, quote unquote, and that concern.
So first of all, I appreciate through the pressures of people like Environmental Hamilton and communities right across Ontario to facilitate this government short-sightedness on what they were trying to sneak through, or not necessarily sneak through, but obviously to push through on this bill. It's still in question, so that's why we're hypothetically going through a process in which we don't even know what we're addressing at this point in time. But I do agree that I'm a natural justice person. I believe that you should always have a right to appeal, and understanding that ultimately government has other tools. I wouldn't want to be recommending anything that would suggest that we deviate from that principle. So I would, and what my concern here is, when you say alternative, it's a little bit confusing, because when I read this report, it's actually part of the recommendation. It uses the word alternative within the recommendation, but it doesn't say it's an alternative position. So it's a bit misleading in the way it's here, so I prefer to have it taken out altogether at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Clark.
So totally respect the institution, the minister and their authority. I am having concerns with regards to what potential regulations could be passed after the fact, after the bill is passed. And so did we contemplate at any time, sorry, my chair is insane, I hate it. Did we contemplate requesting in advance of third reading the regulations that would be attached to this bill? Because right now, I mean, we're operating under the assumption that the announcements that the Planning Act has been removed, that they're going to follow through with that. But we still don't have a lot of clarity on many other items. So I didn't see it in the letter or in the staff report, but I would assume that we have concerns about, as one of the delegates said earlier, the devil is in the detail. what's the regulations that are going to apply to this act?
Through the chair, we did put a recommendation in its CIII that prior to passage of the legislation, additional information on the information and criteria that would be required to accompany such a request, which is currently only referenced in draft in the regulation, be provided. So we did make the note that additional information is required, and we want it prior to finalization of the bylaw. And then we just made a second, more general recommendation, D, that this is, I guess, I could say is a common issue when the province proposes legislation, that they don't provide details up front, and that we would like to, as a matter of course, be provided with the full draft of a regulation prior to it going forward.
Well, I get all of that. I guess the challenge is that this is an omnibus bill which deals with many acts, not just the Planning Act, and I think it would be wise for us to ask that the minister provide proposed regulations in advance of third reading. Not just the criteria in terms of how we would operate, but the impacts on all of the other changes to the bill. With regards to the letter, or the minister's zoning order, I do have concerns there, to be quite frank, about not suggesting to the minister that, yeah, you can play, my words, you can play God and use your zoning orders and do whatever you want. Procedural fairness is really important in these processes, and it's pretty rare that they've ever actually done that. But giving them the idea that they could take it out and just move ahead, and now we hold them responsible, there are some ministers that I think would accept that opportunity and just proceed, and I don't think we should be doing that. So I think it was number 7 in the letter. My suggestion would be that we would indicate that council does not support that. Beyond that, I'll have some comments later on, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A few questions for staff on the report here, and I, again, echo the thank you for the thoroughness on this very important and constantly shifting file. So one theme throughout the report is basically that this planning tool is not a necessary tool. Can you maybe expand on why, you know, in your view, that it wasn't necessary in the first place?
Certainly, through the chair, the stated purpose, at least in some of the notices, was that this tool is intended to provide for more expedient approvals of major employment uses, which would mean that if a major employer wanted to locate in Hamilton, they could locate without having to attain proper zoning approval for if they wish to locate on lands that were not previously zoned to allow the use. And then further, that they would not require approval of a site plan control application following a decision or choosing a proposed location. It's the opinion of staff that the city has sufficient lands that are already designated and zoned to accommodate major employment uses. We have several business parks that are identified in our official plan, specifically to accommodate such uses. And there's provincial direction to intensify those business parks. There's a reason those parks have been located where they are. They're close to transportation choices. They're separated from residential uses, so it's an appropriate location to propose a major employment use, and that's why we want to direct those uses there. So there's really shouldn't be a zoning issue. We have lands available to accommodate such development. And from the site plan perspective, again, we can, especially for major employment uses, if there's a large employer, we would make sure that such an application would be expedited and that a conditional approval would be granted in the normal course within 4 to 6 weeks. And then the onus is on the applicant to meet any conditions of approval through that site plan application. And it should also be noted that although it's unclear to the staff how the process would work under the proposed open for business bylaw, there is an opportunity still for municipality to apply conditions of approval. So it wouldn't, we're not even certain how necessarily the Open for Business bylaw would expedite the process. If we can still apply conditions that normally would have been applied through site plan control, there would still be a need for an applicant to go through the process of clearing such conditions. So we feel our site plan control process is already expedited, it's already streamlined, and there really isn't a benefit to using this tool for a major employer who wish to locate in Hamilton.
So thank you for that explanation. And would it be correct to state that that would also be true for most municipalities across the province? That it would be considered an unnecessary tool?
Through the chair, from the responses that I saw, we did review responses from other municipalities, and it seemed to be a common theme.
So my next kind of question and train of thought here is you have this very powerful provincial legislation coming down, and it's almost like, a little hesitant to use this metaphor, but it's like Sauron handing you the One Ring. And all municipalities, and I think we need to recognize the leadership and maturity of municipalities to say, hang on, we don't want that. And that went back to the province. The province listened to that input from municipalities, and to recognize the province as well, that they did take that feedback. And to Councillor Clark's earlier comments there, where I'm going with this is there a way that we can try and have better communication with the province so that we're not finding out about critical legislation and changes by a tweet, whether that's through, I don't know, lobbyists or some sort of better communication channel? Any thoughts on that?
Through the chair, it's certainly something we do try to do. Both myself and Mr. Robichaud meet fairly regularly as we can with senior staff at the province. Formerly myself, now Steve sits on the Regional Planning Commissioners of Ontario, which meets with the province on a fairly regular basis, monthly. They get updates. It is certainly something we have conveyed that whenever the province does any sort of initiative, 45 days, 60 days is not sufficient time for us to be able to do an analysis of what is being proposed, to write up a report, to get the report through the approvals and get it in front of committee, and that's a significant problem. We have had it yet again with the proposed amendments to the growth plan. We were given a very short period of time, and staff has been scrambling to get a report ready for you to the next planning committee with staff comments on the growth plan amendment. So it is something that we are always telling the province that we need additional time for consultation on these items, and also that we need to have all materials when we are reviewing them. So don't just provide us with the bill, provide us with the regulations, provide us with any sort of interpretive documents so that we can do a full and complete analysis. So any chance we get, we certainly do make that comment.
Thank you, and thank you for the efforts there. Last question is, this is, as Councillor Clark mentioned, this is an omnibus bill which deals with matters far beyond planning. Maybe not a question for planning committee, but is there an opportunity to get a similar kind of report for the rest of the bill?
Yeah, so through the chair, the Planning Act aspects were pulled out separately in order to bring forward to Planning Committee. Legal, through the City Solicitor, has been coordinating feedback on the other aspects of Bill 66. I don't know if Patrick knows the timing for when that report is coming forward, but that is being coordinated through the City Solicitor's office.
I'm not personally working on that report through the chair, but I've asked for an update on when that is forthcoming. I just don't have it at this time.
Thank you, and I'm really looking forward to that report. And again, going back to the municipalities across Ontario really led on this, and I'd say rejecting the provincial legislation, but kind of having that leadership to say, no, this is not something we want. So if there's other similar categories within the rest of the bill, I think that's something that we'll have a discussion on and communicate that and maybe coordinate with other municipalities. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much for that thorough presentation and all the work that has been done. I'm trying to make it a practice of exercising my own discipline when it comes to some of the things that this government is doing quickly. I do respect and appreciate the discipline that you showed in your professional assessment of this. I equated it when I was reading it a number of times to, it must be sort of what a kindergarten teacher must feel like when their student is saying it's a square, it's a square, it's a square, when it's a circle. But fortunately with a kindergarten, you know their trajectory of enlightenment is going up. But this one, I just found it's not a square, it's not a square, it's not a square, it's a circle. That being said, I'm glad the delegate raised the issue of B in the recommendation, because I was going to ask you what public interest is being served in Hamilton for encouraging the removal of allowance of appeal, but your remarks put that in context, and I appreciate that. It certainly made me nervous when I read it. A constituent in Ward 1 who's very thoughtful and much more aware of these things than I am, further to Councillor Danko's comments, raised something that you don't cover in your report, and that is Section 5 of the Omnibus Bill as it relates to the Toxic Reduction Act. And maybe I am repeating the question. I just would like to give a preamble of why I think it's important that this municipality does provide an assessment of it and does take a stance on it. The Canadian Environmental Law Association has come out strongly and against the government's proposal on Section 5, which would repeal the Toxic Reduction Act and proposed that it defer regulation of all Ontario toxic substances to the federal government. The Toxic Reduction Act has only been in effect since 2013, so the argument by the Canadian Environmental Law Association that it's not enough time to gauge its success. In Ontario, we have significant, and in Hamilton too, issues with toxic substances in our air. In fact, Ontario's on-site releases to air of carcinogens is 24 times higher than those of New Jersey. I'm giving this preamble because I think it is in the public interest and the interest of the residents of Hamilton that we have a clearer idea from either you or legal of when we're going to be having those comments and assessment coming forward. So I understand it's ongoing, but we don't have a timeline yet. Is that the answer of when that might be coming forward?
Through the chair, that's correct. I apologize. I don't have a timeline for when that report is coming forward, but it would be contained within a separate report from what you have before you today.
And thank you very much, Mr. Thorne. We would have assurance that it would be provided to us, though, before a door closes on it.
So through the chair, the EBR posting, I believe, has closed on the entirety of the bill. I'm not sure if, I don't know all the different sections that were contained within Bill 66 to know if there were separate provisions within that, but the bill has not yet advanced to second reading. So the comments, the report is intended to come forward before that happens. I don't think the legislature is sitting again for another couple of weeks, which is the earliest opportunity they'd have to take that bill to second reading.
Okay, well, I'm very much looking forward to that. And I guess my other comments at the appropriate time will be with respect to these recommendations that, as Councillor Danko said, there's lots of community organizations, including here in Hamilton and municipalities around Ontario, who have emphatically taken a position on this. And I think we should be clear in our rejection of Section 10 as it pertains to Bill 66, and I look forward to that debate. Thank you.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. So I appreciate Councillor Wilson talking about the discipline that our staff has shown in responding in a diplomatic way to the government, which is generally what our civil servants do in the city of Hamilton. They're candid, but they're technical and they deal specifically with the substance. I think it's important that this body also adopt policies where we respect the institution, we respect the office, and we respect the authority. I didn't always agree with previous governments, but I always maintained those three things. We have to respect the institution, we have to respect their office, and we have to respect their authority. We can disagree, but we have to remain civil and deal with the substance. The one issue that I'm nervous about is, and I think I raised it earlier, is the impact on other municipalities by another municipality's decision. And I don't see any avenue where the municipality that is now the victim or receiving such impact, it could be in our aquifer, it could be in the watershed, it could be in the airshed. It doesn't look like we have any rights to appeal other municipalities' decisions. And so that's a concern, and it would be, in my humble opinion, I think appropriate that we raise that issue with the government, that what they're doing is really creating a piecemeal situation where some environmental laws may be overlooked, and the unintentional consequence could be on another municipality that is downstream from the airshed or the watershed. So somehow, if we could frame that in the document, I think that would be helpful. And the only other thing I would suggest is that we, as a council, acknowledge somehow, respectfully, that the government did hear AMO's requests and the municipality's requests and pulled the Planning Act from this particular discussion. You know, give credit where credit is due. They did that, but we still have other concerns that we believe need to be addressed transparently. And I think we need to use that word so that everybody has an opportunity to comment on these things. Beyond that, I think the letter is great, and thank you for rushing it out to get it out to the public. I think it was really important, Mr. Chairman, to get it out to the public so that they could review it and provide us with their commentary. And I know it was a rush to get it out early, but I appreciate Mr. Thorne's efforts. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you so much, Heather, and the staff for doing this and being proactive and getting your comments out, especially given the time of year as well. I understand this was all done in a rush before Christmas. So that in itself tells you how this was all set up. Could you please go back to, I think it's the first or second slide? There, thank you. So just to be clear, and this is why I wanted the staff presentation, because I did read the report. Schedule 10 has now been deleted in its entirety from Bill 66, but that doesn't mean Bill 66 deleted as well. It's still as amended going forward, as far as you know.
The chair, that's correct.
And thank you. So I'm tagging on to Councillor Wilson's questions, because those were mine as well, is the Section 5, the toxic waste, the airshed. Have we commented on those portions, or were we just focused, understandably, on the planning prospect of this Bill 66? Schedule 10.
So through the chair, in this report, this was exclusively focused on Schedule 10.
Right.
The other schedules of the bill would be subject to the report that legal's coordinating on behalf of the city, and sorry, I don't have the date that will be coming forward.
Okay, so we don't have a commenting period yet for the toxic waste and the airsheds, correct?
So through the chair, we do have the initial EBR posting period, which is closed, but we don't have a scheduled date for second reading that I'm aware of for the rest of the bill. But it would not be until after February 19th, which is when the legislature resumes.
And thank you for that. And just, this is a process question through you, clerk, through you, chair, to the clerk. Airshed quality issues are always brought up at the public health. Is this something that the public health would then be commenting and bringing it back to public health? Does it follow under these certain categories, or is it still left up to planning to continue on with the schedule, or sorry, Bill 66?
So through the chair, I would anticipate that what will the legal report will come forward to a GIC meeting. There's inputs coming in from a number of different divisions and departments who are all implicated by various schedules of that bill.
Right.
The decision was made to pull out specifically Schedule 10 because it had a very explicit amendment to the Planning Act, and that's an act that this committee deals with. So we, as
Right.
Planning and Economic Development, brought forward this as a standalone separate report. All of the other schedules are intended to be reviewed within an omnibus staff report back on an omnibus bill. And I believe the intention is to bring that forward to GIC.
And thank you. Just to clarify something, and sorry, Clerk, I thought that you would have to answer. So through you, Chair, to Jason, thanks, Heather, give me a second. So the toxic waste portion of it, does that not fall under planning? They come in, they get a zoning verification, or they just come in to get it zoned properly, and we designate lands that can accept or not accept this. So does that not part of the planning heading?
Through the chair, I'm not as familiar with Schedule 5. My understanding was that it related to some of the standards and testing tied to the Toxic Substances Act, okay. which goes beyond the purview of simply planning.
Okay, no, that's awesome. And tagging on to Councillor Clark's comments about one municipality having a negative impact on another, and you can go right back to the landfill and the airport. Yeah, so I totally agree with that. Thank you very much. And thank you for the presentation, Heather. Well done.
Okay, thank you. I agree, Heather. Thank you so much and all of staff who've been involved in this, because I'm sure it was an extensive review just by how you laid out all the responses to the points that were raised. So thank you very much for that. So with that, committee may have a motion to approve item 10.2, which is, I'm sorry, my apologies, Councillor Clark.
My apologies, it's not in your roadmap, but we do need a motion to receive the staff presentation first, please.
Thank you. So a motion to receive the staff presentation by Councillor Whitehead, second by Councillor Wilson. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. And then Councillor Clark.
So I just need some clarification here. So this recommendation that is now before us also includes item B of the recommendation, which removes the allowance for the appeal of the minister's zoning order. I think we've heard around the table our concern about that. So do we need direction then to remove that from the recommendation? So I would so move that.
Good.
And in terms of the actual response, how are we going to handle the fact that Section 10 of Bill 66 was removed? So we acknowledge in writing that they've removed it and resubmit the other items in the letter that we still have concerns about. Is that the intent through you to Mr. Thorne?
So through the chair, I think the intent with the recommendation as it's written and as amended with pulling out that one element would then essentially give council endorsement to the remainder of the staff comments on Bill 66. I think it is still appropriate to submit that to the province as the city's comments on Bill 66, because as of today's date, all we know is there is a stated intention by the minister to withdraw that section of the bill. Yep. It hasn't actually been done yet. So I think there is still merit in submitting the amended comments as this council's position on Bill 66. If committee wishes to add something, an additional element to the recommendation that states that the committee is aware of a stated intention to withdraw that section and is supportive of that, that could be added as an amendment as well, because right now we do not have that in any sort of official way.
So that's very helpful. So I guess if the recommendation is before us, then I would move a motion to amend it, indicating that we acknowledge the Minister of Municipal Affairs withdrawal of Section 10 of Bill 66, and we appreciate that. That item B be stricken from the response to the ministry, but the remainder of the report be endorsed by the Planning Committee.
Along with to remove the allowance for appeal, correct? Yes. Right. Okay. Yep. Thank you. So you're going to move that motion, second by Councillor Whitehead, and I heard, sorry, Councillor Wilson to the motion. Yes? Go ahead.
I just was seeking clarification on the language, Councillor. Are you suggesting that we just acknowledge that the government has withdrawn, or that we support the fact that the government has withdrawn? Friendly amendment, then, that we take a stance that we support that the fact that it's been withdrawn?
Is that it, Councillor Wilson?
Thank you.
Councillor Brenda Johnson?
No, I'm sorry. I'm good.
Thank you. So with the friendly amendment then, Councillor Clark's moving it, Councillor Whitehead seconding it. All in favor? Thank you. We're going to go on now to motions. 11.1 is the support for the preservation of the Beach Canal Lighthouse and residents. Councillor Collins, I'll turn to you for... I'm sorry, did I miss something? Madam Clerk, what did I miss?
Yes, item 8.3 is actually being considered
10.3.
8.3 we did go around.
10.3.
10.3,
Yes, 10.3 is being considered after item 14.1 when we come back into open session.
Sorry, Chair.
It's okay, it's in the roadmap. Give me a chance. Okay, thank you. So motions, Councillor Collins. Motions, Councillor Collins, 11.1, please.
I have a notice, actually.
Okay.
Remember from earlier?
Yes.
Oh, no.
Give me the shakes. Councillor Collins, do you want to put your mic on? Go ahead. I recognize you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And very briefly, committee and council were very kind about a decade ago to help the volunteer group who was seeking assistance at the time to save two heritage structures in the city. One was the lighthouse itself, and the other one was the Dwellers Keeping. Both of those structures were constructed, I believe, in the 1860s, if memory serves me right, maybe late 1850s. And though both structures are owned by the federal government, they are managed and owned by two federal ministries. And we assisted with resources to remove, I think it was pigeon droppings. We had a couple of feet worth of pigeon droppings in one of the lighthouses. And we also assisted with a marketing plan that Anna Bradford and her staff assisted with. It came through committee with a number of recommendations. And the goal and objective is, first and foremost, to save the structures that are there. And second is to put them into productive use. So we have a long-standing partnership with the group, the Beach Canal Lighthouse Group. They formed in the early 2000s, and there was originally a push for the city to take these on as a project, to transfer the ownership from the federal government to the city. And my comments were that we already have several orphans of our own, and we've already had discussions here early in the term in terms of St. Mark's, Ockmar, and I could probably add 2 or 3 others to the list. So we really weren't looking for additional heritage structures to take on as owners and operators. But we were willing as a public stakeholder, knowing that these buildings had obviously heritage significance and historical significance, not just to the beach community, but to the broader community. We were interested in being a stakeholder and a partner in a small way. So this motion here seeks to assist the group. They are currently in discussions with both the Port Authority and both federal ministries in terms of how those structures may be transferred, as I understand it, from the ministries to the port, and may be incorporated into a larger development below the Skyway there, although it's still early days with those discussions. So these resources will go towards a building condition assessment to hire an engineer and understand what kind of financial needs both buildings require in order to allow public access or continued use. So the recommendation is fairly straightforward. I'm forgetting one thing. I'll leave it at that for now. If there are any questions, I can certainly assist. And I know that Anna Bradford was kind enough, and Ian Kerr-Wilson were kind enough to assist with the resolution that you have in front of you. So.
Councillor Farr, so the motion is before us. All in favor? And it's an electronic vote? No? Electronically, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Now I'll turn to Councillor Farr for notice of motion, Madam Clerk. Is that appropriate?
It's fine. Or we can do 13.1 and 13.2 and then Councillor Farr's motion.
How about we do Councillor Farr's motion? I've got staff also waiting. Okay, please do. Go ahead. Oh, sorry.
Whereas residents of the west side of Wellington Street North between Robert Street and Barton Street have long desired to be afforded the opportunity to park adjacent to their homes, whereas on-street parking that currently exists in the area is often consumed by general hospital staff and visitors, whereas Wellington Street North is 4 lanes, one-way southbound, where traffic volumes have dramatically decreased over time. Therefore, be it resolved that the appropriate staff from parking be requested to notify residents by letter of the opportunity for them to apply for West Side Wellington Street North on-street parking permits between Robert Street and Barton Street. Thank you.
Thank you, and that's a notice of motion. Councillor Collins, did you want to speak? It's a notice? No, thank you. So that's on the record. Councillor Collins, I'll turn to you next.
Thanks, Madam Chairman. And first and foremost, thanks to Joey who tipped me off today that there was a, it was in the news, there was a news release that Oshawa and the Hamilton Port Authority were going to merge. And so I would like to ask staff for some information in terms of, through a formal motion, if I could, if you'll allow me. Absolutely. So I'll raise it now in the context of it being a notice of motion. And I'm essentially just looking for information. So if you'd allow me to waive the rules to introduce it as a motion.
Moved by yourself, second by Councillor Farr. All in favor to waive the rules? Do we have to do electronic, Madam Clerk?
Yeah, okay.
You have that, Madam Clerk? I don't want to rush you. You got that down? Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And the motion essentially would be that staff report back on the legalities of the merger between the Oshawa Port Authority and the Hamilton Port Authority, and that the information report contain information related to the financials associated with the same. And so I ask that in the context of, if you'll allow me then, on that request for information. I was a part of the negotiations that took place in the late 90s when the former Harbor Commission was in court with the city over surplus profits. And I learned at that time as a member of the subcommittee that Councillor Whitehead was a part of that as well, with being the assistant to the mayor. I learned through that process that port authorities and formerly harbor commissions act as almost economic development corporations. And so in the early part of the last century, they were formed by other levels of government to assist with industrial development in large urban centers across the country. And part of their old legislation was that surplus profits were to come to the city. Those profits didn't flow, and so the city took legal action, and we settled those disagreements outside of the court process around 2000 and 2001, right around the time of amalgamation. That helped us form the Waterfront Trust with $6 million. We received lands around Windermere Basin, and there were some other associated agreements that were a part of that as well. So when I read the news today, again, thanks to Joey, what concerns me is that I know that the legislation was changed around the time we were going through the court process, and the Canada Marine Act and letters patent essentially are the federal legislation that governs how port authorities operate across the country. And they emphasize, and I just, as a refresher, through the committee meeting, looked up the federal website, and they emphasize the business discipline and self-sufficiencies of the ports. So they're not to be subsidized by the federal government. Federal government has historically provided capital assistance to ports across the country. We've seen federal announcements here and elsewhere with federal representatives coming with resources to assist with economic development, and that's essentially either for equipment, upgrades to certain buildings, and or the creation of land. Randall Reef being a prime example. And they're also, port authorities are to act in an autonomous and arm's length from the government, and they operate on a commercial basis with a view to being self-sufficient. So in that context, when I heard the announcement, and I turned to Oshawa's recent audit that they had of their own port authority, they lost money in 2017, so their recent audit was presented publicly, as ours is here locally. Theirs was presented in November. They lost, in 2017 calendar year, $230,000, which doesn't seem like a lot of money. It's also noted in their audit that they have liabilities over assets totaling, I think it's just over $6 million. So my concern in that context is that I have a lot of questions, knowing that the federal government is not permitted to subsidize port authorities by legislation. My concern is that if Hamilton, who's in a very positive position from a financial perspective, takes on a struggling neighboring port authority, are we then, by extension, with the economic proceeds that have been generated in Hamilton, subsidizing the operation of port authorities elsewhere? And I think it also, even at a high level, you could start to question, you know, this is essentially, the Port Authority is an extension of our economic development department. We attract new businesses here. They look, obviously, if you look at their mission statement, to create employment locally. And so for me, in the broader context, you know, with them governing now and a geographic area outside of our municipal boundaries, I guess you could start to ask whether or not we're now in competition with ourselves in another municipality in that context. So lots of questions at this point in time, and I would like to formally ask then that staff, with whatever research they can through either planning, legal, or other departments, economic development I think would be key as well, come back to the committee with some understanding in terms of how that might impact us locally from an economic development perspective. But also, I just, you know, essentially, is this a legal process that has occurred in light of the government's legislation that is posted online and is available for everyone to see? So,
Mr. Thorne, you've got answers, and I've noticed in here there's time periods for this as well.
Yes, through the chair. So there is a limited consultation window. Yeah, happy with the councillor's motion. Just want to clarify, I didn't hear it in the motion where that report back was being directed, because with the financial and the economic development implications, it probably is something that I would suggest is more appropriate to GIC. So I didn't catch whether the councillor had indicated or not.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Whatever gets this moving fastest and
meet those deadlines would be great.
Us at the table would be most appropriate, right?
Yep. Thank you for that.
That was one of the things I was going to raise, and I want to thank CBC. It was, in fact, it's posted on their site, and that's where I became aware of what is transpiring. And it actually lists this March 11th as the public comment period. So we need also, and I don't know if it was included in the motion, but it's not just about understanding from our perspective, but what strategies would we embark on in regards to ensuring that all stakeholders and the general public are heard from. I mean, I wouldn't mind actually having our own type presentations and opportunity for them to come here and present concerns and so forth, so we can articulate those issues ourselves. Because I suspect that the comment in the process in which they embark on with this particular might be somewhat limiting, and I just want to make sure we have a long history. Councillor Collins and I were very attached from different perspectives, because I had the advantage of being part of the negotiations in the mayor's office, but then when I went to Sheila, the conversation continued. And of course, Sheila Copps was the federal minister that helped facilitate some of the settlements through that period. And so it is concerning to me that there's a very short time frame for public comment. I think we need to probably think about whether we would have our own consultation with stakeholders in our own community relative to this issue, so that we can encompass that with any comments we provide prior to the March 11th deadlines. Might be some duplication, but you know what? Like Churchill says, you can pound that same message over and over and over again. I'm paraphrasing, of course. So if we can do that, that'd be absolutely wonderful, Madam Chair. And I certainly second the motion, and I think we need to get on top of it very quickly.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
So I just wanted to get some clarification in terms of what the actual motion is. I'm assuming that we're wanting staff to look at the legal nature of any agreement, what the nature of the agreement is, the mechanism, what acts are involved, and what consultation process or appeal processes there are there. I'm just off the top of my head spitballing. It could be a memorandum of understanding or an agreement where they're administering Oshawa, and is that legitimate? I don't know, but it would be helpful if we had that breadth of information, and I'm looking to Mr. Thorne to make sure that we're going to get that response back.
Yes, through the chair, we can certainly include that in terms of what is the recommended governance structure, both in terms of what the federal government may be recommending, but likewise what council may want to recommend be that governance structure.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. So we have a motion on the floor. It's been moved and seconded. Electronic vote, Madam Clerk, please, and thank you. Okay, thank you. And I'm going to move on now to general information, other business, outstanding business list. May I have a motion to approve the changes to the outstanding business list that's before you? Moved by Councillor Farr, second by Councillor Danko. All in favor? Carried. Oh, we have to move that electronically. My apologies, everyone. Electronically. There we go. Thank you. And now I'm going to turn to General Manager Thorne. Any Planning Committee economic development updates for the committee today?
Through the chair, just one, and I do hope I'm not having to ask for this every single planning committee, but we have another provincial announcement of the growth plan amendment, that we have that coming before you to your next planning committee with the staff recommendation. So once again, if staff is able to release that report early to the public, with planning committee's concurrence, we will do so. On this one, we've been given an even tighter timeline. I think it was something in 45 days, something in that range. So we do hope that possibly by mid to late this week, we would have that report ready. And we can post that publicly at that time if committee is supportive.
Okay, and recorded vote, Madam Clerk, thank you. Ready? So with that now, well, I just want to thank Jason, also the PED Talks. I've had the pleasure attending the last one as well, and I encourage any of my colleagues around the table when PED Talks comes in and they have the presentations, they are excellent. The last one was LPAT, so it was representatives from the province that gave an overview of the process for citizens that want to appeal, what the process involved and the assistance that's available to them, etc. It was a really informative session. I appreciate all of the sessions so far have been very, very interesting and most enlightening. So with that now, we do have a private and confidential item. Sorry, Councillor Wayhead, my apologies.
Madam Chair, so originally on the agenda, there was two items. My understanding, and you announced it at the beginning of the meeting, that one of the items is being referred. I met the proponents who came here in good faith, believing that it was going to be for us today. And I was suspicious because we never did receive the report, the confidential report on that item. So my question clearly is, do we not communicate to the proponents when in camera, or there's a change on the agenda that may impact or not impact their them? What is the process in informing, one, and two, what is the rationale on referring it to another date? That was 14, it was originally 14-2, I think.
14-2. Madam, I don't believe the staff are here, that the legal are here that would be dealing with that specific report. So Madam Clerk, do you have any information?
That I was advised by legal that it should be deferred to the next planning committee meeting.
That's all. I just saw what you saw today.
So again, Madam Chair, again, I don't have 14.2. So was it again a plan to actually give it to us, or are we going to have to wait till the next planning meeting and it's going to appear in front of us magically on the blotter, or are we going to have it beforehand? One, and two, what's the rationale in deferring it to the next planning meeting?
Through the chair, with regards to the first question, I don't know about the delivery of the report. That was not my report. With respect to the rationale, that's a matter that might get into legal advice, so I don't think it should be discussed in open session at this time, but it can be discussed in camera.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. So with that now, we do have item 14.1 is Terra Pure Stony Creek Regional Facility Environmental Assessment EA Compensation Agreement, LS 18045A and FCS 18072A. We're now on this item, and does committee wish to discuss this report and move into closed session? Consensus that we go into closed session. Councillor Johnson?
Question, and if this is something that can't be answered, I can take this offline. I'm reading 10.3. I'm assuming this is an open document. It's on yellow sheet, so I'm just making sure this has been available to the public. Okay, so my only question is, A, if we give you the authority to go in to negotiate, does that null and void the other contract, or does that keep it in abeyance until we have a different agreement?
Good afternoon, Justina Hidalgo here from Legal Services, and through the chair, it is not null and void, the original agreement. Well, I guess depending on what happens, because the report in 10.3 gives authority to negotiate and enter into.
Yes.
The committee here can decide whether they want to just give the authority to negotiate, and ultimately, if the negotiations prove fruitful, we can pass on whatever resolution or compensation was negotiated to the ministry and say, this is what the parties negotiated. If you are going to approve this undertaking, make it a condition that these terms are imposed on TerraPure. Or in the alternative, you can give us authority set out in both A and B to negotiate and enter into, and we would enter into the agreement at this time, in a short time period, and then advise the ministry or not advise the ministry that the agreement was entered into.
And thank you for that. Where does it come back here so that we understand the agreement before you send it to the ministry? Is that put in play? I didn't read that.
So,
are we okay to be discussing this in open session? I'm leaving it.
It's generic.
I think this is generic enough and doesn't require us to go in. The way the recommendations are drafted now, they are left to the general manager of Finance and Corporate Services and Public Works to be satisfied with the terms of the compensation agreement, and then the authority goes to the mayor and clerk to sign the compensation agreement. So if the recommendations as now written are passed, you are delegating that authority to the general managers to be satisfied with the terms. And of course, there's already an existing agreement that will continue if better terms are not negotiated.
Thank you. And I don't want to delve into this. It's just process. I'd feel more comfortable if it was brought here and then the mayor can sign off. That's my only comment to this. I think that it's just one more step to make sure all bases are covered.
So if I may just clarify, we are working against such a short timeline with the comments to the ministry on this final EA due March 1st. So we only have, if the committee would approve the recommendations, we only have between now and really March 1st to even negotiate terms that are satisfactory. We wouldn't have time to come back to approve them for the subsequent communication to the ministry. Of course, we can reach tentative agreement subject to council's approval and communicate that tentative agreement to the ministry and communicate the fact that it's still subject to council's approval.
I would like that one. Thank you. That's the option I think we should go with. Thank you.
So we have the recommendations before us, and there's no interest in going in camera. Councillor Collins, my apologies.
Thanks, Madam Chairman. I just want to be sure. So last term, we were twice, I think, before planning and or GIC and subsequently to council that we were opposed to any expansion of the landfill site. And so there is the March date that is referenced that Justina just mentioned again. We need to reiterate our opposition, notwithstanding the fact that there'll be negotiations that occur with the compensation agreement, but we need to reiterate our opposition now again, or that comes prior to the March deadline in a separate report? Or is that accomplished here with what's been written?
So if I may address that through the chair, there is a separate report coming to the Planning Committee on, I believe, February 19th, discussing the actual position that the city will take and the comments that will be passed on to the ministry. So that's kind of a separate process. So whatever position the council takes on the undertaking itself can be communicated, and then the comments with respect to whatever negotiations, whatever is the result of the negotiations can be passed as an additional component of those comments to the ministry.
Great. Thanks, Justina. Thanks,
No
Madam
problem.
Chairman.
So with that, then, I see no indication to go in camera, but Councillor Johnson wanted an addition to, I'm assuming, item B, recommendation B. Thank you. Sorry, put you on there.
To move these recommendations with an amendment that tentative agreement may be sent to the ministry, but that agreement will be finalized once it's been approved here at council. So we can still send them a tentative agreement, but it's not in stone until we look it over and say, yes, this is what we want. And I heard February 19th. Is that too soon? That we're having one come back, even though they're two separate things. They're considering the same property.
You know, I guess if an agreement is reached between now and February 19th, maybe we can include it as part of in advice at that time and
Or an
committee
update,
can reach a
even,
decision.
Justina, would be nice too. So that's my amendment, is that it's tentatively sent in with the agreement that once it's been approved here, if we don't reach the deadline on the 19th.
So I'll move it, that's moved by yourself, Councillor Johnson, second by Councillor Collins. All in favor, a recorded vote, or electronic vote, sorry. Oh, you stepped, sorry. You stepped out. Because you left. Okay, so Madam Clerk, I don't have to do any of this stuff with regards to, it was all in open session. Sorry? Oh, sorry, we have to do it again. Got it. Okay, thank you. Then with that, Madam Clerk, there's nothing else on Terrapure. It's all done. Motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Farr, second by Councillor Johnson. All in favor? Thank you, everyone.